And we are recording on Tuesday, May 26th, 2026 at 12:05 p.m. Eastern Time with Mr. Tom Luongo and Mr. Matt Dines. And as you're just saying beforehand, you're like longtime listener. Normally, when people say they've listened to my show, there's only two reactions. Or my primary reaction is always like, take a step back because there is no middle ground. It's either what you said, you're like, it's awesome, man. There's no like, you don't toe the party line, or it's like you fascist, eco-terrorist, Nazi. I'm like, all right. So, and then what you said also, it's like, yeah, here's a guy that doesn't, toe the party line for better or worse. Like that is, I love it because my conscience is clean. I can just be who I am. It's been a bumpy ride for those reasons. I don't condone it because I think it's more morally weak and being a pussy, but I do abstractly understand why people toe the party line. I'm like, I'm not signing off on it, but I'm like, I get it. I get
Yeah,
it just being a yes man. It's not good. I don't think I don't respect it. But I get it. But Tom, you've been on here a zillion times before. Matt, could you please introduce yourself?
yeah. Well, let me just start. I told, some of my best friends, I was like, oh, I'm going to do Tommy's podcast on Tuesday with Tom Luongo. And they know Tom Luongo. A couple of them knew of Tommy's podcast. A couple of them had no idea. Like it was just like, oh, this is a new rock. What is this thing? So I introduced them. I was like, oh, go look on his feed. I told them, I was like, all right, what's his calling card? He's not going to bow down to censorship. Like if I had one thing to say, it's like he won't do that. But then I think if you're looking at someone new and they start to listen to discussions that go outside of the Overton window, and what they're going to find on cable news or even just front page, like I'll talk about my background in finance. You're not going to see it on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or, Financial Times. But I think something that really got the ones who hadn't heard of you to like not write it off was actually the humor in your show titles. So Hormuz replacement therapy. They're like, oh, that's funny. I like that. So
I
keep lean
stole
into
that.
that.
I stole that shamelessly for the news for a subject for a subheading in my lead article in like the newsletter
That is
that month.
fucking great.
And Dexter was like, "Hormuz replacement therapy is hilarious, dude. He never compliments. Like I get a compliment at him like twice a year. So
Yeah.
just passing it on,
No,
Tommy.
the funny thing
Well
is
done.
I was so tired during that episode. I don't feel good or something. I forgot I made that. It's like the next day. I looked at it and I was
Smart.
like, oh, that's brilliant. So I keep
I
going,
think
Matt.
it's a
Yeah.
it's a great tactic to bring new people in so they're not so uncomfortable when they're
Right.
like out of the normal waters of what the news and
Right.
information flow that
Hmm.
they're used to
Yeah.
getting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, my background, Tommy, I know like you talk about in the past, you're so like very proud of your accomplishment getting into med school. That was kind of my same like little corner in life I was walking into. I graduated from undergrad into 2008. And that was my plan. Went through the whole dog and pony show, got accepted in med school. And I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. It was kind of what my mother did. I was like, okay, this is the family tradition. I'll just
Hmm.
keep going down that path. But kind of knew deep down this isn't what I wanted to get into. And you could just see the lifestyle. Like a lot of physicians, they're not happy about
Oh.
just the work-life balance, all that. You can't go to your kids' sports games. Um, and I just kind of saw that. And then I also kind of got the writing on the wall where healthcare was going, with more and more kind of government control
Uh-huh.
of the whole the machine. I'm just, just made a gut call. This was like August 2008. School would have started end of August, and I just, replied back with a letter. I'm not going to go.
Oh.
They replied back with like, "What are you thinking?" I'm
Uh,
just like, I'm pretty sure this is right.
did
Lehman collapses like 12 days later, and then we're in this new world. So I kind of took that as like, a lot of people in our generation. I'm a couple of years older than you probably, but going through the desert, what do I do with my life? And I think young people are still trying to answer those, hey, I'm of the outlook it's much more bullish, and like
Hmm.
a positive, like the white pill as opposed to the black pill. There's a lot to look forward to. We
Hmm.
can get into that. But I started leaning into like thinking about what I really liked and going back to, school. Like what were my favorite classes? Math, history, and economics. We actually had AP economics in high school. It was like
Wow.
macro. It was all Keynesian bull, but
Right.
I wanted to learn about it. And I was like, obviously, all right, this is This is what I want to, go down. So that led to getting more and more into finance. I eventually got to the point mid 2010s, like within well, it was actually one of my best friends from high school and I were working on this kind of the same way Tom Luongo and Dexter White. If you listen to him talk about when did you first meet Dexter, it's like a lifetime relationship, right?
It is. Yeah.
Um, I went through that thing with one of my best friends from my hometown in Central Missouri, and he was a financial advisor. I was coming up. I worked at like a big bank, then I got into big tech, and just kind of we saw the writing on the wall, like everything coming out from the Bernanke era, Yellen era, where Washington D.C. was trying to go. Kind of had an early sense by like 2012 when the midterms rolled over, all of that, or no, 2012 presidential election and everything going on with Republicans and Democrats in DC, that there was something brewing, right?
Hmm.
And taking a big picture on history, the monetary policy, all of that's like, hey, actually about money, right?
Hmm.
So we started our own firm. When I say that started, we were working on it as our nights and weekends projects, like just
Mhm.
two dads, 5 kids between us,
Mm.
and just hustle and grind. And by late 2018, we started our own. It's basically like a professional financial asset management firm. So an RIA is the term you'll hear describe it, but it means you're regulated by the SEC. Um, so yeah, we got off the ground and we've been doing that for 8 years. The benefit is I can do what I want. I don't have to worry about HR coming over me if I want to come and, speak on Tommy's podcast with Tom Luongo.
Come talk
Um,
shit. Yeah.
Right.
and the downside is you just don't have scale. So you're always just punching from below as like a challenger in the industry. But we can go into, well, what we kind of thought coming out of 2008 and the 2010s and where we thought it would lead. But now I'll just bring it into Tom Luongo. If you look at all these, the big banks, investment management firms, they all have this, these guys, or sometimes it'll be a woman, and they'll send them out onto the mainstream media, CNBC,
Mm.
Schwab Aftermarket on Yahoo Finance or whatever,
Hmm.
and they're supposed to talk about these things going on, like what's actually happening, and they're terrible at it. Because all they'll say is everybody's just responding to the Fed. It's like the market. What did it do today? It's like it was up, and then it always boils down to what's the Fed going to do about rates or something like that. Or
Right.
now the thing is, oh, they're bull. It's like, oh, today the discussions between Iran and the White House went well or something. It's like up or down. It's like this is so bad. And then I gradually like lean into Tom Luongo as I discovered him probably 2022, I think,
Yeah.
as your following was really taking off.
Hmm.
And his kind of mental model or mental map of the world, I think, reflects much more of the on the ground realities. And I'll just kind of try to bridge this together. So, Tommy, you do a lot of reading. It's very clear. Like you'll read military history, intelligence deep dives, all of that.
Right.
My entertainment is actually reading like financial economics and like geopolitics history. And I try to find old books that tell the story of these big kind of turns, developments, transitions from the standpoint of like the sovereign states, the governments, they're competing over resources and finance, my core interest is like a key battlefront in that. So just a couple of books, like I'll throw out, like The Prize by Daniel Yergin tells that story of the
Mm.
history of oil, but it's a geopolitical conflict. Then you get a little bit of finance as the deal making is in there.
Right.
Um, Other books like this one I'm on right now, Fritz Stern, Gold and Iron. It tells the story Bismarck unifying Germany, all these challenges he's going through. And it's the gold part is key, right? It's the
Right.
bankers. How do you finance the military operation? So you hear Tom Luongo's thesis. He makes sense of the world in those framings that very few like his actual peer group from the like the establishment, like they have their strategists they roll out, and whether it's by design or they gate themselves, they just don't actually give you any signal. Like they're just
Right.
there to sell product, buy more stocks,
Mm.
buy more bonds, and you're good.
Right.
Um, But yeah, that's what, Tom's view of the world, among a small handful of others. I think his foundation actually does make sense. It has anticipatory, power. You're
Hmm.
never going to bat 1,000, but you'll do much better than try and do an ex post, just cue everything up to the Fed narrative or some other, whatever the current thing is, right? Um, so yeah, that's how I got here. And I'd say like zoom out. I have, started just putting my own views out there in this podcast, mind print hash. Why did I go through that? Um, I focus on the the role of money in that big picture process I
Hmm.
described. And I think the name of the game is actually, for one civilization to compete against the others as we're all trying to clash, right? The society that can create a monetary structure that defends itself. What do I mean by that? It's like you're under constant attack, and it's the Lenin quote, right? He's like the fastest way to it's actually and the most effective way to conquer another society, peoples, whatever, integrate them into your orbit is to like debauch their money. And then Keynes in his own writings in the 1930s like takes what Lenin said and then double stamps it. So it's like, all right, that is actually the key here. And all the economics, that I was taught growing up and everybody else, if you're going through the institutional system, you graduate with the degree, go get a master's, study a PhD, or you go work in finance, you get involved in the game, or the whole distribution, apparatus of moving, financial assets, which is, what the industry largely focuses on. They miss that key point. So you're trying to build this money that can live up or hold itself as a defense. It's like a complement to the military, right? And you need both of
Hmm.
those things. But yeah, the mining, printing, and hashing are the three kind of tools I just kind of picked up over history. This is how the societies like the financiers, this is what they have at their disposal. You can coin money, hence
Hmm.
mining, pull the gold and silver out of the mine, put the mint up, give people some confidence. When you squish a metal and you put the dollar on a gold standard or a silver standard or a bimetal standard, what you're actually doing is the metal is doing the work of establishing value, and it's
Hmm.
actually the sandwich in between the bid and the offer of the market, so
Mhm.
that you have the money, you can
Yeah.
transact together,
Right.
and humans coordinate through trade. The more trade you have, like the society thrives. Um, but then those are also, everybody, you hear the sound money camps, the gold bugs. Everybody has their one of the three that they'll focus on. And they don't recognize, hey, gold, silver as money, they've all failed. Like you can look at China,
Mm.
you can look at US. Like that mechanism is open to attack through the fractional reserve scheme. So that one can fail. Then you have print, right? It's like maintain an accurate ledger. That'll fail as well, just through the it has no pushback against the inflationary pressure, right? So eventually you'll just build up more balance sheet claims against the
Right.
economy's finite resources. And then your ledger just becomes, hey, can we stand up to political pressure to QE this thing? And the answer is it can't. Like this is
Right.
like the modern Fed. It's you can't like just through board control, all of that. You just can't push back through like the technocratic, the Keynesians' desire to print and QE the number higher. And then in 2008, we got this new one with hashing, the
Hmm.
Satoshi figure. Who is it? Well, we figured out how to secure an accounting ledger with energy inputs, and you could also say compute inputs. But you see like there's three camps who are like, this is the way, like gold, or it's like we sound
This.
money, we got to go back to gold, or the
Right.
print. You got the chartalists or the MMTers, and then you
Hmm.
got the hashers, the Bitcoin maximalists. Who, like, I would say if you actually look at my like history, I sympathize more. Like I think Bitcoin's important. I'm very clear on that, but um, you have to actually the name of the game. I think if you're trying to establish a what's the right word? Like most defensible money. You got to
Hmm.
use all three of those. And I
Yes.
think that's what we see going on. If you look at in hindsight recently, I can go through history, like where this happens. The definition of the dollar will change over time. Um, Best layout of this is Edwin Vieira's Pieces of Eight for listeners who want to deep dive in this. It just starts with, the Spanish milled dollar, like in post 1492, colonial trade, and then takes you up to the 1980s with this euro dollar, offshore dollar credit bubble that I'm sure Tom and I will bring up in conversation a lot. But I'll just put a pin in it here. In 2022, I view with this big picture framework, 2022 was like a key election where we took a fork in the road on the monetary future of the United States. We were on one path under the Biden junta, as Tom calls them. Um, we were headed towards the CBDC, and we can get into what that means. And then on the other path is, let's call it the Scott Bessent path, because he's clearly got the Gantt chart, and
Mm.
him or people behind him are the one organizing this. But it's a private issuance of the dollar, which ultimately, I think. A good word to think about it is like treasury supremacy. We're moving back towards ultimately treasury owning that dollar as we're trying to sandwich something in between that bid offer. And I guess hard fork the money, the dollar itself, into something that works for the next, I mean, you could say 10 years, 20 years, just get us through this pickle, right? With this exponentially growing debt burden. But if you hear the bullish take on it, it's like, well, if we do this, then we can unlock the golden age. So that's kind of the promise versus I think the Biden path was leading to somewhere that was probably a dead end. So
What's real?
I'll leave
What?
it there. I can get into the details.
Sure, sure. No, and Matt, this is it's really interesting. You put it that way, and this is what. So it's interesting. I was. By the way, his is one of the only podcasts I actually watch anymore. Like to be honest with you, because I learn stuff all the time, and the reason that I learn stuff about it is because I'm always trying to figure out. I don't know plumbing as well as I should. Like as a guy in my quote unquote in my position, I came across this kind of organically, just kind of moving through the process. Like first a gold bug, saw Bitcoin for what it was when it came out. I'm like, ooh, that's interesting, and then had to eventually reconcile my all that stuff, the kind of Misesian, Austro-libertarian hard money stuff with the reality of the treasury market, which is the most dominant market in the world. So yes, mine print hash is a very interesting metaphor. And I'm always a sucker for a good triptych. So while I was listening to that go on, and Matt and I've chatted previously. Like I met Matt up in Calgary when we went to Cornerstone, and he came up and we chatted for 6-7 hours, some retarded amount of time, and I just realized like, okay, this is a guy that I knows something that I don't, or at least has organized this stuff in a way that I haven't. And so it was a fascinating conversation while we tried to get Matt Ehret's wife Cynthia Chung to understand what was going on, and because she was completely not right, and which was interesting, but she good sport that she hung on with us for 6 hours and multiple glasses of wine and a couple of double ryes. But what's interesting is that you're right in that to get through this situation, the gold bugs aren't right, the Bitcoin maxis aren't right, and the treasury dominance guys aren't right. It's an amalgam of all three, and the interplay between them is what's important because they all check the other one. What I've been saying about for months, and why I get in trouble with Bitcoin maxis, is I look at them and I go, dudes, like gold strengthens Bitcoin, Bitcoin strengthens gold, and the treasury market is the mechanism by which the modern financial system operates. You can't take any one and say, oh, we're going to go all the way to endgame. This is a classic kind of Malthusian argument. Bitcoin maxis they're just Malthusians for Bitcoin. Just like gold bugs, like Peter Schiff, are Malthusians for gold, or Keynesians are Malthusians for treasuries. None of that is real. What matters is that they can all interplay and reinforce each other. And I think that's when I started to go down that path with this transition. And I noticed you mentioned 2022, obviously when we went to SOFR, right? That that moment is when we started building the foundation for that new multi-asset collateralized framework. Treasuries can stay in the mix for as long as possible because you still need a defensive system, right? Like I've looked at the Federal Reserve as an army, right? It's just a military asset in financial markets as of right now. If it's used that way, if it's used as a fifth column against this, like it was under Bernanke and Yellen and Greenspan and others, well, then that's how it undermined the United States. But once we moved to SOFR, it became an army. When I tried to explain that to the Mises Institute, they didn't want to listen to a word I had to say because they had married themselves to this framework that was wholly domestic without understanding that it's a big global world out there, and money and capital abstracted doesn't care what form it takes in order to get the best return on its deployment. They don't care if they can get the best yield in Bitcoin, they're going to move their money into Bitcoin. They get the best yield in treasuries, they're going to move it into treasuries. They're going to get their best yield on gold. And it all depends. So better to understand that these institutions are all then backed by, at the end of the day, U.S. military power.
Mm-hmm.
And your ability to enforce your will upon the world. And therefore, if the U.S. government under Trump and Bessent is saying we're going to use treasuries, Bitcoin, and gold, and we have the biggest military to enforce that, that's what's coming. And there's fuck all you can do about it. By the way, we obviously we swear like sailors on this podcast, and that's the reality. And this is why I keep saying over and over again, like, I watch these people like light their hair on fire about what Trump is doing in the Middle East. Like, you guys don't get it. This is about enforcing that new worldview and that new monetary system that Matt just kind of outlined. And we're doing it. And why? Because fuck you. That's why. Because we can and we will, because no one can stop us from doing so. Because everybody else in many ways, we're dependent upon them, but they're dependent upon us. And it's a give and take. And it's and this is why I think the Chinese the other day, greeted Trump like fucking royalty. Like, when the Chinese are like, I said this the other day when we were on with Dave and Jim, I said, look, did you realize that they had Chinese dancers and a band playing YMCA on the friggin' with the friggin' red carpet? I'm like, guys, take the fucking hint. Like, it's not hard. And so I didn't come at this in a structure, just so you guys understand, like, my evolution has been just out of necessity, trying to understand this better as I go along. There was never a plan for me to understand to get to where I am today. It was always just, well, that's not working, but that is. And what about this? And then you just keep iterating on certain basic heuristics about and the reality of geopolitical incentives, and you go, oh, well, then clearly that means that, and it can't mean anything else after you get 50 or 60 data points which falsify that. And it doesn't matter that you get one that isn't, because at that point there's always multiple reasons as to why some other data point, especially in financial markets, why somebody does X, Y, and Z. But the body of evidence eventually says, okay, we're not doing discrete statistics about this stuff. We're doing kind of Bayesian probability predictions about where things are going to wind up. And then, as people resist that process, yeah, they do things that are contradictory, and but that happens, and there's so many different competing factors in any one particular market that it's very, very difficult to get people across that line if they're resistant to it, because they want to stay in their old framework, which is simple and to their mind predictable. But when it's wrong, you have to admit that it was wrong, and you got to move forward. And if gold was going to, this is the last point, now I'll turn the mic over. If gold, for example, if the gold bugs were right all through the 2010s, gold wouldn't have languished in a 10-year bear market after 2011. Gold would have not bottomed in 2015 at $1,000 an ounce. Gold would have never went backward, would have never went down to that level. Same way with silver. Silver would have never bottomed out at $16. Like, they did, because there were other competing factors. And so at some point, when the people who have real power and have a lot of capital can move markets in a particular way, especially when they have political power, real political power, moving the US military around to do various things, you can get a whole lot of movement against the trend. That doesn't mean that they're going to win. It just means that they're winning this round. And then, eventually you get to, kind of where we are today. And in the hope that someone would then take that big power and deploy it in a and a singular focus. And we forked the road in 2022, and now we're on this path. And
So I'll
that's where
get
we are, and everything else is irrelevant. Go ahead.
so the fork is the big story, and I think that'll help
Mm,
explain a lot to the audience. But I'll just, I want to start at the changes in monetary structure are
mhm,
very hard to see because they play out over 30, 40 years. And you think, oh, the dollar we interact with right now is not the same dollar as, 1965, when you got
mhm,
a treasury, like your dollar note in your wallet was a not a Federal Reserve note. It was a Treasury issued certificate
mhm.
redeemable for a defined number of ounces or weight in metal. If you show up to the
Right.
Treasury's windows throughout the country. All right, my
Mhm,
point there. It's very hard to see these things, building up and falling apart. Like it takes decades. So most of us, like that's half a lifetime just to get through one transition. So we don't really see it. It's just kind of baked into the water that we swim in.
mhm,
But if you don't come in with like your approach to geopolitics, even like trying to call balls and strikes, every week, essentially update your thesis. If you don't appreciate that monetary backdrop, it's very difficult to get anything right. Like you're really driving without a map
mhm,
and relying on intuition. Like, instead of like GPS or something, it'd be like asking directions from like in the olden days, we're like, turn left at the McDonald's. If you see the blue factory on your right, you've gone too far, turn back around. It's like you don't have any bearings.
right.
But yeah, so understanding what's going on in the capital wars, like and my kind of framework and trying to understand the world and ultimately in finance, that's what we had to do, right? We're all just
Mhm,
trying to invest our savings to preserve and grow purchasing power into the future. If you don't kind of think about this in that way, or if you don't come in with that structural underpinnings, you get wrong-footed at the transitions, and that's where I see, especially in 2026, is like a year where like it's go time. I
mhm,
compare it to. I think Bismarck is a good analogy to understand what he did, unifying Prussian Germany.
mm,
Very similar situation coming out of like the 1850s in continental Europe. I'll get into that, but
sure.
it hits ahead. It's go time. 1864, where it's like we're making our move on Schleswig-Holstein. It's in play. It's like, well, that sounds like Venezuela right now and Iran.
Mhm,
And then you get to the big war, the Prussians war with Austria. Austria folds. The key reason is, Bismarck knew through the financial channels, like, ooh, the Austrian Empire, they're on desperately weak footing financially. It's like, yeah,
mm,
if we just bait them into declaring war on us, we will take them, and that's what he does
right.
within weeks. So he goes through this period. All right, we're rolling up, and then what happens. He was in a very situation pre 1864, that Schleswig-Holstein affair, which is like it was bringing in this Danish kingdom in the northwest of Germany. So those familiar with the map, it's like Hamburg,
Mm,
integrating that, where Prussia was more like Berlin, parts of Poland, Pomerania, like all that stuff. It was moving westward as we got to this German unified state. He like there's a controversial secession for this little territory right under the old feudal landed elites type of model. um, and he uses that kind of secession lack of clarity, like whose orbit is this going to go into? Is it the Danes or is it Prussia? And then just organizes the war, whatever. But before that, we went through this period similar to like 1850 to 1864. We'll talk about. I'll probably bring it up later in monetary history of the United States, what was going on, and
mm,
how the greenback is a big analogy to this monetary,
yes.
fork we're traversing with Scott Bessent. But you went through with Bismarck, like what was he? He's the executive. He's like the U.S. version of the president. The executive branch is by definite, like they are the actual government from the interaction day to day with the private sector, right? We enforce the rules. What we say goes, but that's the government. So he's the what do you call it, prime minister or whatever. He serves on behalf of the king, William. Um, who's centered in Prussia. And then he's got this parliament he has to deal with because part of this trend of the 1800s was this movement of egalitarianism where everybody gets a vote. It's not just the landed elites who run things. Um, but I'd say Bismarck represented the conservatives. And by when I say conservatives, what does that mean? It means you want to stick to the legacy institutions or even social norms. And you see that today as well, right? You say like, all right, it means, nuclear family, whatever. Or it could just mean, hey, we want to preserve the integrity of all the institutions we built up. But he had a hostile parliament who you would say represents the liberal framing, which is like, hey, we're going to lean into new social norms, um, people or like peasants not being, tied to, the land or their lord, like,
Hmm.
feudal age. That was Bismarck's class. These Junker, it's spelled Junker, terrible branding, but they own the land. They held it for hundreds of years. Peasants, instead of being tied to the lord or prince or whatever, they go into the city and they work in factories. So the other powerful trend was industrialization. But just to bring this home, the executive branch was facing a hostile parliament or Congress, right? And by parliament, what we mean is the people themselves had some uh, democratic authority to send in a representative body to government. It's not the government. They're not as balanced as, in the US, we have Congress baked into the Constitution as a one of the three key bodies of government. You saw Bismarck was just constantly at odds with this,
Hmm.
liberal parliament, and then the nouveau riche, the new industrialists, bankers, etc., who were like challenging the legacy, wealthy, the Junkers, for their authority. So similar to what we have now, in my view, we've got a
Hmm.
conservative executive, hostile parliament or hostile Congress with terrible approval ratings. Like the people don't even like their, duly elected government. It's starting to not even the people can sense it. In modern times, I'm talking now.
Right.
It's not representing their interests. And then when you get into the war, this is where I think like something really critical starts to happen. The people start to realize which of these two things is actually working in their interests. And before, where it looks like you've got a divide, there's polarization in this whole kind of zeitgeist that we've been placed into, I think in my mind, ever since 2008. But it was
Hmm.
really developing before that. I'd say at least to 9/11, it was
Hmm.
starting or separating us. I think if you look to history as your guide, there's a monetary element of this as well, and Germany, all that we don't need to get into. But once you start settling and one side wins this tug of war, the the actual what do you call it, like the center of society, like where society actually is, will reveal itself to be somewhere that nobody expected beforehand, except for say the
Hmm.
people on his side, like Bismarck. So suddenly he went from an unpopular figure pre 1864 as he's establishing the new consensus, as he's able to take ground in Schleswig-Holstein and then Austria. And ultimately it comes down to finance. How did he finance his operation? They were doing similar things to what we're seeing right now. He had, all right, the railroad build out was big then, and you're building railroads throughout continental Europe. He organized or like negotiated a stake in, a railroad, the Cologne to Minden railroad line. Doesn't matter, whatever, irrelevant. But it gave the government an asset equity that they could monetize on their balance sheet. That allowed them to pay their soldiers. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, once you hit kinetics, it comes down to who's got the deepest, straw, right? To echo Brent Johnson's milkshake theory,
Hmm.
if you've got the deepest straw to suck into capital in this global capital war, your military, you can pay your soldiers, pay industry, pay your technologists to give you the tooling, what weaponry you need, so that the patents out there can go win you the war, right?
Right.
So that's
And
what I kind of focus on is the monetary side. Tommy, you love reading the military history. Tom, you love like Patton
Right.
is your
One of my
all-time
heroes.
fave. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I just, this is just over 10 to 15 years. I exited the same, indoctrination facilities everybody else did, but I don't know, just through stuff I like reading, this is kind of
Right.
how I learned to think about the world. So when you see things going on like Iran, Venezuela, soon Cuba coming soon to a theater near you, right? You're
Absolutely.
like, oh, I've seen this movie. And then when everybody else is all like losing, or you've seen a similar movie,
Mhm.
and things are different this time around, but things are never different.
Right.
If you like echoing that phrase, this time is different, right? In financial markets, it's never different. Um, but that's kind of how I see this thing going on. And then now we can get into 2022, right? There was a huge fork in the road. Obviously, we've been fighting for control of Congress, the presidency, the Fed, and that was a key battleground, in my opinion. So
Mhm.
under the Biden administration, you had an executive order, it's 14067, that directed all of, the executive branch directed to all the government agencies, regulators, Congress, et cetera, to start researching from like a regulatory, legal, technical framework to start putting in a CBDC. And you could
Mhm.
say like it's not we're not going to go there. We're just seeing if we can do it. It's like no, that was the plan under that kind of political faction, capital faction, power
Mhm.
faction. And I would map it into, what, Tom, what do you call it today? I mean, besides City of London, the globalist, Davos,
Whatever
et
you want to
cetera.
call it.
Plug it into that architecture, the high table.
Mhm.
But what it amounts to is it's a public money where the Fed itself, the Fed is just an institution everybody's fighting over. We can get into that with what you see in the headlines about the board,
Mhm.
Kevin Warsh, Jerome Powell, Lisa Cook, this
Right.
proxy fight going through. But if you think about it, there are no reserves at the Federal Reserve is the is the secret. It's like it's all just this monetary emission mechanism where at the end of the day, it's like with the Keynesian framework, you you just you need more government treasuries, constantly being emitted, and those are the base level collateral in this, credit-based monetary system. And it's just like the Ouroboros tail eating itself. Like
Mhm.
there is no head or tail at the end of the day. It's like it's all just levered U.S. Treasuries, all credit at the end of the like turtles all the way down type of
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
Um, but that's ultimately what the CBDC is. It's like your stopgap where, all right, we still maintain, term for this is outside money. The base money is something that resides outside of the private sector.
Mhm.
Um, I don't want to use too many terms to confuse people, but when I say outside money versus an inside money would be a private sector determined good, whatever it is, gold, Bitcoin,
Mhm.
oil inventory, Canadian maple syrup in a warehouse, whatever, just a good that sits in the private sector's hands. And ultimately, like that's your base money. And we talked about sandwiching value between the bid and the ask. And then whatever that is, we'll call that the dollar, right?
Right.
And then the defense mechanism is you've got a constant arbitrage available
Mhm.
to keep credit, growth in the economy in check relative to the resources, productive capacity of
Mhm.
the economy. But anyway, the 2022 executive order from the Biden plan, it's like, all right, we need to do the CBDC, which is a it's just like full-throated, like we're just going public money.
Mhm.
It's not even a vague attempt to make this monetary system at its base level be something in the hands of the private sector, which is like a treasury bond. It's like it'll just be a Federal Reserve number in a server, which is
Mhm.
run by the public sector, which is the antithesis of private households, businesses, everything you, me,
Right.
and probably most people in the audience interact with. It's just purely the state, the technocratic state, owning money. So that was the road we were going down. It's a Marxist path, right? It's the same
Mhm.
thing as it was Lenin's wet dream. Like it was if
Mhm.
you had to compare it to something in history. Versus, all right, the Besant path, and this was only available because of what Bitcoin kind of showed the way in 2008 with hashing, is hey, we've got another path available where we can get these, we can still get a dollar on a print standard, like it's purely ledger money, but there's a way to square the circle here where we can get a private sector issued money, and the demand for this money, this dollar, is uh, in under the control of the private economy, households, businesses in the United States, but also global as well. We'll get
Mhm.
into that. Um,
Mhm.
but it's two different forks in the road, and I view now like it's pretty clear to me what we were actually voting on as an electorate in November 2024 was those two separate paths. Because in the big picture of history, that's what actually matters. Like it's going to matter more so than any, individual figure. Although I do tend to believe in the great men. They play the key role in his or key roles in
Mhm.
history, or women, both. It can be both.
Mhm.
But those big picture trends, like what is happening with the money, that is much more. Nothing's ever purely deterministic or explanatory 50 years down the road. But that's like the base layer of civilization, and your money will define whether your society thrives, keeps growing, consolidates, more participants into its block. Like we're seeing, hey, Japan's coming on board as even more of an ally to the United States than they ever have been. Oh,
Mhm.
Argentina looks friendly now. Oh,
Mhm.
look, Venezuela wants to stop working with Hezbollah and all the other intelligence community cutouts. It's like, oh, they want to come into, they're picking up what Scott Besson is putting down. All right. So you're seeing other participants come in. This is the building block foundation of the future, in my opinion. That is going to be like heavily shape, the United States for decades into the future. So when you see a politician talk about a future golden age, MAGA, et cetera. It's like it comes down to the money, in my opinion, like
Mhm.
the monetary changes. If you can fix it out, if you can figure out, take the pieces that technology gives you, people give you, all of that, and you can design your monetary system in a way that it's most defensible, the most robust, all of that, then you're going to thrive, right? Other
Yep.
participants will come in and arrive around you. And then on the opposite, if you're Europe, you don't have answers. People don't align around you anymore. It's like your bull run from 1492 to 2021 is coming to its end game. And
Yeah.
ECB, Christine Lagarde. If you see those names out there, they're still going down that path, and that Biden and that administration was steering towards in that executive order. I can go through the Besant, Gantt chart, the executive orders, all of that, but like it's underway. So you see this going on. It's slow. It's a multi-year story, but
Mhm.
I can talk about the pieces. You can see it. You can see it building and getting put together.
You're
Yeah. It's
bugging.
very
You're bugging
obvious.
in here.
No, I was gonna say you can see it. No, Matt's doing great work. I don't, part of the reason why I set this one up, Tom, is because I wanted people to see. I wanted people to see it from a different. The most of the stuff that I talk about, see it from a different perspective. What's important is he's correct, absolutely, in this respect, because the oh God, now I got done with that. Now where did my head go? But it is a big thing, but it is a slow process, but it's also very, very quick, because once you get towards a tipping point, then capital doesn't wait,
Mhm.
right? Once you put enough wins on the board, once it's like everything's the same, and then all of a sudden, how did you go broke? Slowly and then all at once. How did the world shift from one monetary standard to another? Slowly and then all at once. And we've been building this thing for years. Like when I started down the path with SOFR, I said the only way that this survives is if um, you know, is if Powell is not forced back to the zero bound. Right. So politically, someone had to be standing behind somebody else, right, to enforce what Powell was about to do, which is when he started to tighten dollar supply in 2021, right? What I call the 5 basis points to change the world, when he raised the payout rate on the reverse repo facility 5 basis points above Fed funds. He drove all that. He drove capital into and money into that facility, draining global dollar liquidity. And then the natural reaction from the Biden junta was to try and force him back to the zero bound with profligate levels of spending. And when somebody stood behind Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin and said, you're going to vote against that. I'm like, who's got the power to tell them to do that and make that stick? It's a short fucking list, guys. It's like Wall Street.
Mhm.
It has to be the big money center banks have to already be on board with this. And so then you ask yourself, and I did this simple question. I said, well, why would the commercial banks, which are arguably the power structure of the United States, why would they go along with the Fed taking over monetary transmission and cutting them out of the VIG? It doesn't make any sense. Of course they're going to fight against this. So, and the other thing I wanted to point out is when you bring Bitcoin into the entire architecture of Trump, and then you have to realize that Eric Trump is the most consequential person in the Trump 2.0 because he's the one that sold Bitcoin to his dad.
Wait, he did?
FYI. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, absolutely. Eric Trump is a massive Bitcoin guy. And so when you look at Trump's kids, you realize that there's a variety of things going on here. And one of this is that Eric got all the brains. Ivanka got the looks. Don Jr. got the charisma, for lack of a better term. But Eric got the brains. And if you look at all the things that are happening now within the Trump administration that are reversals of the shit that was going on while he was in exile during 2022, 2023, and 2024, meaning his fight with DeSantis and Susie Wiles and all that shit, all that political stuff that was going on behind the scenes, it's Eric Trump that's been greasing the skids to get all this done. Lutnick had the inside track on Treasury Secretary, and then someone handed Trump Scott Bessent. And 3 weeks after meeting Scott Bessent for the first time, Bessent was his Treasury Secretary. There's a reason for that. Bessent, whatever. Bessent made an argument to Trump that was powerful and to figure out, so Trump, the master of debt. Remember, if one guy understands debt and how to use debt to get what he wants better than Donald Trump, I argue, is there somebody on the planet that understands media and debt better than Donald Trump? I would say no. And so,
which is America.
Not from the banker's standpoint, but from the borrower's standpoint.
Media and debt.
But
That
from a borrower standpoint. No, you're absolutely right, Matt. This is important. We move the focus of policy away from what's good for the banks to what's good for the borrowers, right? Why does Trump want to get Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship, control the long end of the yield curve, recapitalize the middle class, open up their cash flow? Why does he want to? He wants to literally, put the kulaks back in their land. Like, you know what I mean? When you start to use those kinds of historical precedents, what is a CBDC? It's to take the kulaks and move them off their land and move them into 15-minute cities. It's the same thing. It's the same process. And by the way, let's not talk about how Lenin was a creation of City of London. So
we can't go down every rabbit hole.
Right. But understand that this is all part of the thing. And I love I don't know shit about Germany in the 1860s, but I do begin to understand that I owe Ellen Brown an apology about greenbacks, because she's been screaming about greenbacks as a means by which to get back to the United States, to get back to Treasury issued money for decades. But we weren't but when she was doing it back in the aughts, and I was a pure Austrian retard, I looked at that and I said, no, that doesn't make any sense. But now we're in a moment where the stable coins are the means by which to do a new form of greenback and create Treasury issued money with a private relationship between the government and the local banks, and change the monetary transmission system completely away and take it away from the Federal Reserve.
I want to go into the greenback a little bit so the audience can understand.
No, I agree.
What the heck we're talking about.
If you watch the show, you know that I have to piss. So you guys keep going.
Go for it, Tommy.
I was teeing you up for that, Matt. So
perfect.
Yes, so we're going there. So yeah, so let's talk about that, because I think that's really important.
So all right, I'll set some context here.
Sure.
Everybody knows the Civil War, what happened there. Everybody knows, you should have heard of the greenback in your high school history class at this point, but all you pretty much understood from it was it's bearer money, or not bearer money, but legal tender, paper notes, no interest, right? Let me get into how we got there. It was through a position of need. And we had a Treasury Secretary who was, you know, he takes the artistic tools that are given to him by, the times and circumstance, um, figures out a monetary structure that works, and then it progresses, American society, money, financial system, all that economy into the next iteration. So starting point for background, we're heading into the Civil War. It was like the same amount of polarization split that you're talking about in modern America today. So if you need mileposts to get you there or signposts, remember when who was the Republican Speaker of the House before Mike Johnson? Kevin McCarthy or something like
Yeah,
that.
McCarthy. Yeah.
When we were going to take the votes, who is going to lead this congressional majority? It took something ridiculous, like 17 votes, like just an insane amount of votes just to
Right.
get to
Right.
a consensus. It was like you see in the reporting, it's like, oh, this is the most number of votes since 1855 or whatever it was. It's like, oh,
Hmm.
oh wow, there's a lack of political consensus here. This rhymes. All right.
Right.
So what was happening from the economic standpoint in the United States? We had the Panic of 1857, which is like if you just look at these things in history, right? 1929, 2008, like these
Hmm.
these big drawdowns. Um, those are your sign that like an old structure is pushing its an old financial structure is and monetary structure is pushing itself to its extremes. And then you have to have some sort of the system collapses as you're up to the edges of your productive abilities, your capacity, all of that. All right. So the the political kind of whatever toothpicks were holding it together, the
Hmm.
political consensus of the United States up until the Civil War. After you get to 1857, it's like, well, that's the last like straw we were standing on, and then you just start to move towards a complete breakdown, and that's where it went to fisticuffs, right? Everybody gets their guns and does their thing.
Before we go further, I just remind everybody what the Panic of 1857 was. This is very important. It was the first transcontinental global financial collapse, right? Starting in the railroad banks who had over and we had a lot of foreign investment in the build out of the railroad system in the United States, and James Buchanan refused to bail out the banks and forced
Mm,
them into shutdown for over a month while he shored up the local banks with specie, silver and gold, in order to make sure that the local economy stayed vibrant and moving. And he just said to the banks, "Well, I'm not bailing you out."
mhm.
And he refused. And it was the first time an American president did that. And his reward for that was, of course, being shunted, becoming persona non grata at his own party's convention in 1860, by the way. Just that we have to have some context on that one to
Yep.
understand what happened there. It was very important. He let the banks fail and forced the New York money center banks and the British and French and European banks that invested in all this work out their debts because all these railroad loans went bad.
Yep.
And
And
yeah.
so very similar, you see the technological wave you're riding on, and the private economy is riding on,
Hmm.
is something like, oh, we got railroads now. Let's let's
Hmm.
let's do that. And so you see a
Right.
big rush capital.
Right.
It's an arms race until we overbuild is the general
Yes.
kind of pattern in a boom bust, economic and monetary cycle. I'm talking short-term cycles here. Big
Right.
big cycles are what we're talking about with the
With
definitional
the
transitions.
with the typical European hot money ins and outflows.
Yep, yep. Oh, and we'll talk about that as we get into T-bill markets yesterday.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Put a pin in that. All right. So everything splits apart. Oh, I wanted to just bring up railroads. Think about that, a new technology at the time. You see it today, AI,
There.
semiconductor build, data centers.
Same.
We're doing the same thing.
Right.
There's the private sector is pushing, and capitalists are pushing that same animal spirits that is just a fact of life for the interplay that we're
Right.
talking about. Okay, so all right, you get to the Civil War, the North, the Secretary of Treasury, a guy named Salmon Chase,
Hmm.
um, comes up with a scheme. Like the North has to fund its soldiers. They're low on gold specie though. They
Yeah.
don't have the resources. So if they just keep raising debt in the gold pegged definition of the dollar, they're going to run into their resource constraint. And, as I talked about in war, if you've seen the Game of Thrones, right, the show, it's like, who are the key figures? They only show up like once a season, but it's the bankers, right? If you don't have your
Right.
bankers, you
Hmm.
can't pay your military, and if you can't pay the military, you're gonna lose, right?
Right.
So they figured out this scheme, and they argue within the constitutional authority. We didn't know at the time if this thing foots to the actual constitutional framers intent regarding monetary powers of any branch of Congress, but or any branch of government, Congress or the executive. But anyway, he comes up with a scheme. He gets Congress to pass this law. He's like, we're going to issue debt to households, but it's going to be legal tender. It's going to be short-term maturity. It's not redeemable for anything. It's a dollar IOU that doesn't mature at any date like a bond would, and it doesn't pay any interest. And so they issued these greenbacks out there to pay for, like, essentially it's just scrip in the war. And it proliferates like the U.S. economy. Like it gets the North the resources it needs to keep funding itself and outlast the South in a battle of attrition is what it
Hmm.
largely turned into.
Yep.
And then after the fact, Civil War is won, Lincoln is assassinated, all of that. The country is still circulating these greenbacks, and it issued a ton of debt to fund this war, similar to this debt overhang that we built up for ourselves in modern day, and every country did. Like,
Hmm.
look at the debt situation of every country that came out of the Allied powers in World War II. They're all in this massive debt overhang situation.
Hmm.
All right, so this same Secretary of the Treasury who organized the greenback, Salmon Chase, he gets appointed to the Supreme Court. And the case comes before the Supreme Court, like, were these things constitutional? And you get into like, hey, was this an emergency power? Do we roll it back? He actually voted like to roll it back. Like this was a special, what do you call it? Like it's not an embedded Article One power. It's more like an emergency national security survival
Hmm.
situation. We need to roll it back. Well, the Supreme Court voted to be like, no, no, no. This is actually in Congress's Article One powers. Doesn't It's not consistent with the rest of the Constitution, in my opinion. I'm not a
Hmm.
constitutional lawyer. Read Edwin Vieira's Pieces of Eight. He is. And he can go through that legal argument. But it actually goes and gets tested before the Supreme Court. Survive, like it stands, and that comes into play later in 1913 for what we'll call the chartalist definition of money, the print maximalists. But what we do in the meantime, the circulation of these greenbacks, what it actually did was it liquefied the domestic economy, so debt
Hmm.
became easier to repay. And then post Civil War, you had this industrial build out, right? What do you get after the Civil War? You look at like the Gilded Age, all of that. So you're like, all right, Rockefeller is just discovering oil. We're figuring out how to produce energy economically. We're figuring out how to produce steel
Hmm.
in Pennsylvania, all of that, Carnegie's, and we're just like we're booming. And by 1875, then, all right, we went from this dollar standard pre-Civil War, which was like largely banknotes and gold specie. Government was largely not involved. To Civil War, you get the greenback. Treasury maximalism, where you see the dollar unit just turn into treasury script. And then that thing just heats the economy. You get all this growth. You get banks funding these industrialization projects. And then 1875, the Congress and Treasury align and they pass a law. Hey, we're going to get back on the gold standard. So then they repeg, and then that just allows the U.S. to kick butt. So that's kind of the background we're talking about with the greenback and what made that all possible to get through this like shift from the panic of 1857, which is like the analog of the system crash, like
Hmm.
2008 or
Yep.
1929. You, the situation at this point, it's not a deflationary collapse like 1929 was. I would say
Hmm.
It's more similar to what we were going through in the Civil War era. And so
Hmm.
that comes down to, Tom was talking about the factions and how they align. He says U.S. banks supported ultimately the Fed and Jerome Powell to set up SOFR, because how can that thing stand up to defense from the international, capital markets? I'll talk about the offshore dollar in a second. You got to have the U.S. banks behind you at the end of the
Right.
day. Like that's what it comes down to. Um, so there's different, same way we talk about Iran. They're not a monolith, right? Civilian government, IRGC, two separate things, possibly and very likely working with two different capital factions globally. Um, but like that gets into, let's set the framework today and where we've been since, like you could say World War II, but I'll just, started in 1970s, right?
Hmm.
When we broke the dollar link, like Bretton Woods was a system coming out of World War II where, we all gathered the Allied powers in New Hampshire and decided, hey, internationally, we're going to peg the dollar to gold, right? So everybody can issue gold IOUs, but they'll be redeemable for gold.
I drove by
Uh,
that place last summer, and
oh,
I
sweet.
had noted I was up for going to Mount Washington with my family. I did a double take and said Bretton Woods, and I was like, totally. I knew it was in New Hampshire. I was like, oh fuck, there,
It's right
that's it.
there.
It's like,
Right
oh, I'm
there.
like there, that's the thing. Yeah, sorry, keep going.
Yeah. All right. So everybody comes in and you lay this structure for the global dollar, which has just proliferated since we're on this global dollar standard. Um, Everybody would be able to issue dollar IOUs, and that would be the currency of the realm for this allied powers like economic bloc coming out of World War II. And then Russia did its with the Soviets.
Hmm.
That would be your antipode. But you've got this offshore dollar, all of the local currencies, your German mark, your French
Marks.
franc, all
Right.
of that, like it just indexes to the dollar, and then the Treasury and Fed uphold this gold vault. It's redeemable for gold, and then onshore. People talk about Executive Order 6102, the people got robbed, all that. It's like, well, it actually, you got your gold got pulled out, and that all went into
Hmm.
the Treasury's vaults. But the Treasury actually gave you silver. So if you go through the policy response to the Great Depression, this is in a book, Silver by a new NYU professor called Silber, Silber, goes into this, the history of silver from the
Hmm.
U.S. perspective in the 20th century. The the Treasury under FDR, who was that secretary? Tom, like him, is Morgenthau, right?
Oh,
The right
yeah,
name?
and Morgenthau. Yeah, yeah.
You can
Yeah.
see it in their private memos. They were bidding silver because silver fell below, the dollar. Like technically by the book, silver is pegged at certain weight per ounce is $1. It was trading at like 24 cents on the dollar. It's something ridiculously low. So what Treasury did in the 1930s, we built up this massive hoard of silver like in our vaults. And then
Hmm.
what the Treasury did is we shifted. So between, I don't know when it went live, but your treasury bills in your pocket were actually redeemable for silver.
Hmm.
You can look at go on eBay, you can still find them. It'll
Oh, yeah.
cost you a few bucks. It's a blue certificate. It's like a gray, and then the stamp is blue. So
Hmm.
if you see those collectibles out there, but what the government, the Scott Bessents of the time, the systems they set up, it's like, all right, we did Bretton Woods internationally, which meant we're going to be gold backed for international capital flows. And then domestically, we'll be on a silver standard, right?
Hmm.
That all started to collapse in the 1960s as the Keynesians just kept milking their cow. So every
Hmm.
time we get into a recession, what do? Well, since the Bretton Woods anchored the dollar, everybody in the world's on a dollar standard. We had to start bailing out that entire system every time the global economy went into recession. So what do we
Yeah.
do? Well, you couldn't cut rates. Interest rates wanted to go up because of all the things we were doing, like
Hmm.
Vietnam, Great Society,
Society. Yep.
Medicare, Medicaid, all that stuff. So interest rates wanted to go up, and then like the safety valve we had to play with was to depeg the dollar. So it
Hmm.
first hits the domestic economy with the Silver Certificate Act of 1967, I think it was. Um, they eliminated the ability for the public sector dollars to redeem into silver, and then 1971 Nixon closes the gold window. And the reason for that is actually the rest of the world was printing these dollar IOUs and
And buying our gold.
yeah, and just redeem
Just,
them into
just,
gold, like
that's
rinse
right.
repeat. Yeah.
Yep.
So then you get, all right, the 70s are all about an oil run up. Iran at the end of it kind of puts the final blow off top in with the transition from the Shah and like a friendly government to
It,
America, I would say.
it really is a repeat of all the same shit. It's inflation, civil
Isn't
unrest,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
unpopular wars, going the
yeah.
space race in Iran.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So one of the things that became obvious to me about 2 years ago was that Nixon closing the gold window was not a debasement of the dollar. It was a defensive maneuver to keep the dollar from to keep us from losing all our gold reserves because Europe was literally just sucking it all away from us. I made the argument that Churchill knew exactly what he was doing because he ran the same exact playbook after World War One. He repegged the pound to the pre-war dollar rate, causing a massive wave of global deflation in order to get Germany to pay its reparations for the Treaty of Versailles in gold. The Germans have to hyperinflate to buy gold on the open market to pay it back. And when the British balance sheet was, gold should have been $80 to the pound or whatever the hell it was. It's no different than what they did
Yeah.
after World War II. Like people talk
That,
about the United States having a debt to GDP ratio today of 106%. We
yeah.
had a debt to GDP ratio in 1946 of 228% or something
Yeah.
retarded like that. So it's exactly the same scenario.
Yeah.
And they knew full well that we were never going to be able to hold $35 to the ounce. But because we had to re-liquefy the world by rebuilding it through basically greenbacks overseas, and they're known as Eurodollars, except that these were paying interest on top of everything else, which was an even faster drain. Just to finish the point, we went from 22,000 tons of gold in 1950 to 8,133 before we closed the window. And the drain began right as we started the Korean War. And the Korean War is yet another goddamn British and French operation that forced us to. It's basically it's no different than Build Back Better in the same scenario that we were talking about earlier with SOFR and trying to get Powell back to the zero bound. You create a massive uh, legislative demand to print a fuck ton of money and then debase the currency. And then, oh, well, we have to look, the dollar's like going to the way of the dodo. I'm like, dudes, this is fucking structural. This is an operation. This is not random. Okay.
Yep.
That's when see, I don't view I do, don't, none of this is market stuff. This is all directed action that creates a market response. Okay. So go ahead, man.
Oh, I was just going to say that example you brought up,
Mm.
Churchill raiding Germany.
Hmm.
That's case in point to that process I talked about earlier. You got to have a defensible money. If you have a
Right.
defensible money, you can defend your
Hmm.
civilization, right? So
Yeah, that's right.
Churchill in World War One, I think about that as he was like it was a capital attack. It took military effort to bring it
Mhm.
to heel, but
Right.
he at the end of the day raided all of the gold for this thing that Bismarck built and put together from
Yes.
1850 to
Bingo.
1890, which is
Nice.
look at what he was doing. Like Tom, you frame this in terms of a poker game. Bismarck in this poker game was a Phil Ivey. He's just like that good and put something together. Churchill is also, I mean, I would like compare him. He's the shifty dealer. He changes the house rules, whatever. But
Bingo. Yeah,
um,
yeah.
like London borrowed from New York to fund this World War One operation,
Hmm.
put it together.
Hmm.
And then ultimately, what it amounts to is like talk about defending your capital base. Like he accomplished the sacking of
Of Germany.
Berlin, yeah, of
Hmm.
Germany, got their gold out, and then that allows Peter to pay Paul. The
Hmm.
New York bank gets whole. Then they ran their playbook on the U.S. with the
That's
gold
right.
inflows, buildup of credit claims into the
Hmm.
bubble into 1929, rinse repeat.
Yes.
But yeah, that's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about. Case in point, that middleman. It's like, yep, the second generation after Bismarck were nowhere near as capable as he was. Wilhelm II, kind of the scapegoated figure there.
Right.
But yeah, he lost it all. But yeah, so I want to get into like there's three versions of the dollar right now. Start with the
Sure.
easy one. The onshore dollar is the one I would say it's like inside the regulatory confines of the United States. Like where does our sovereign government have authority, right? And so the banks are part of that. I mean, it's just your reach. Um, Offshore dollar, Tom was talking about, it's all the IOUs outside of the United States that are denominated, like it's economic transactions in US dollars. Like,
Hmm.
why would that be? Um, this has been going on forever, right? The first offshore dollar transaction that I can find is actually the Louisiana Purchase. We had no gold. Like we were like the United States was coming off of like we were just in the rag scenario. Like we'd
Right.
spent all our chips in the revolution. We had a ton of debt outstanding. We were just trying to put the thing together. We didn't
Hmm.
have the dollars to our or the wealth to our name. We say it like the backing
Right.
to go out and buy this sovereign claim on the Louisiana territory out from France. So what we did is we went into debt to European banks. We bought it out, and we worked our way out of it. Right, we settled
Hmm.
the territory. We exported uh, all the agricultural produce, all of that to the rest of the world as they're kind of at war.
Hmm.
Europe's at war with itself in the early 1800s. But
Yep.
this whole offshore dollar, they've been tapping into the dollar capital pools for basically our nation's entire history, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's a tug of war to like from our United States standpoint, our constitutional order, how much of that U.S. dollar authority lives with our internal banking system and how much of it is outside, right? And on this standard, when we break the metals, right, we knew we were doing this, but we protected the metals like in vault. If people say, "Hey, we don't think the gold is in Fort Knox or West Point or that third facility in Colorado," okay, but if it's not there, like we're in a bad way.
Right.
Like
Right.
none of this. We're like shooting our way out of the corner in the back room. I think we're having a ton of success, but if we don't have that gold, uh, it's
Right.
going to be much harder. All right. So this offshore dollar, it's outside of the regulatory purview. London banks, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Caymans, everywhere, like they all print dollars, these IOUs, and it's all fugazi, right? That's just like a debt
Hmm.
claim on the productive resources of the economy. But we're in this buildup where there's no, we talked about the sandwich of value. What's in between? If it's gold, silver, some other Bitcoin, whatever, shoelaces, I don't care. If it's something in between, there's some arbitrage where the private economy can keep the the technocrats, the statists, the intelligence community, all of those people honest because they have a way to push back. In this scenario or this framework we've been in since 1971, this offshore dollar, centered in London, priced on
Hmm.
LIBOR of that, we had no ability to rein in that credit expansion.
Hmm.
Levered USTs, my X handle. That's what it is at the end of the day,
Hmm.
all the way down.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and the Fed in that framework, think about everything Greenspan and later, for those in the audience who don't think about this, starting in like 19, whenever he was appointed after Volcker,
It's
um,
83, I think.
it was, yeah. He comes in there as a supposed um, Ayn Rand disciple, all of that. But it's kind of like you are what you say you are at the end of the day. Like your results speak for themselves.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and he's in there for like 20 years. Um, and he's kind of just, I mean, part of it is you're just operating the system that's been handed to you. But the
Right.
way this worked, it's like, all right, we're just going to print more debt. Um, and that's going to lead more debt creation, create some real growth because that's where actual money printing happens. That's how money gets into
Mm-hmm.
the private economy for you and I, everybody here to deal with.
Hmm.
Um, Print more debt, that'll lead to some GDP growth, but it gives you diminishing marginal
Returns.
returns. And
Yes.
eventually you run into the point where it's like you print more debt like we did in 2020, you end up like not getting any bang for the buck out of it. It just turns into inflation, price
Hmm.
inflation
Hmm.
from a system standpoint. All right. So here's Greenspan's path. He's just like, all right, well, this offshore dollar system, it just wants to keep expanding this dollar credit bubble. And every time there's a recession or the system needs a bailout, what we're going to do is we're going to lower interest rates, make it easier, reflate the thing. Like reflation is just like add more units into the game. It's like in a poker game, Tom's analogy. Uh, hey, there's eight people at the table, but like six of them are like really short stacked. We want the game to go on. What do we do? Oh, just have the dealer inject chips like every other
Right.
hand. And like
Right.
that's what Greenspan was doing.
Hmm.
That system starts to run into its stresses. You can see it by the late 90s. You see the
Hmm.
first time when the Fed has to start bailing this out and like printing units itself, starting with the LT, long-term capital management
Hmm.
bailout. Then you get into 2001, then you get into 2008. And we were just on this road and went from Greenspan to Bernanke to Yellen. Powell did it too, where that playbook
Hmm.
was, I call it it's like the Keynesian three-legged school or the new Keynesians, they call
Hmm.
themselves. Same as the old guard, just,
Samuelsonians actually, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but yes,
Good one.
good.
All right.
Yeah,
So it's like, what do you do?
there's the book that everybody was forced to
Yeah.
read when they went
The
into college economics was Paul Samuelson's book on modern which is not Keynesianism. It's post Keynesianism. It's
post,
actually,
yeah.
yeah, it really is. It really is.
New,
It's
new,
we don't
better.
we're not even Keynes would be horrified by what we've done. FYI. Yeah,
So,
just to give
yeah.
you an idea. Yeah, go ahead.
So the policy prescription there, as I see it, right? It's quantitative easing, which means bring more, like Fed injects more chips, the central banks inject more chips at the poker table every other hand,
Mm-hmm.
cut interest rates. So you see that downward trend in interest rates, which is like coinciding with the dollar or fixed income bull market.
Hmm.
Um, and then fiscal stimulus. It's like go COVID, CARES
Yep.
Act, Bill, just like
Hmm.
spend it. Um, that game. All right, and then the other important thing in my mind is Nixon invited China into this trade. I call it a business franchise. If you really think about what was happening in the big picture, what was like Columbus, Magellan, all of those explorers doing? They were navigating sea routes to bypass the old Silk Road, right?
Hmm.
This is all about trade, tra east to west trade, silk, porcelain, other, like Chinese goods that were in demand. They travel through Central Europe, Kazakhstan, all that stuff. The Middle Beltway, where all the action's literally happening right now, right?
Right.
Syria, all of that, and then it works its way up into Europe. What the Europeans were really trying to do was find maritime trade routes to bypass the Silk Road. They did it,
Hmm.
and that put the old Silk Road out of business. And like we're in the world we're in. Um, but I'm trying to think where we were. Offshore dollars, cut QE. Okay, yeah, you invited China into that
Hmm.
business franchise in
Yep.
1971. That really was the life raft that China needed coming out of their century of humiliation, like starting with the
Hmm.
Opium Wars, all that. And China, in my view, had been in decline ever since the Mongol Empire collapsed, which
Hmm.
coincided with these trade routes appearing. Their financial system, like that's your collateral, right? That
Hmm.
that trade flowing east to west. Um, Europeans put them out of business, and that's where we've been on. So they get China gets the life raft. Nixon, Kissinger actually invite them into the call it an American led franchise, but I think of it as more, as Tom frames it, it's an Anglo-American partnership that
Hmm.
had been like it worked for everybody ever since the early 1900s, I would say, but we've milked that one out. Like this
Hmm.
is part of the debt bubble. It's like, all right, for every unit of debt, you're no longer getting anything productive. You're probably actually just making yourself worse off. All
You
right.
are.
So China comes into the orbit. That's the other key thing because when you bring China into that framework where you could do QE, ZERP, and fiscal stimulus, China, by providing actual like physical goods into that system, is a kind of suppressant. Like it's CPI deflationary. So that's the key
Yes.
thing as well. So you get it. Actually, my view of when this thing actually kicked off, I think you go back to 2014 when China said, we're no longer going to buy incremental US treasuries. What that meant is um, you're not going to get any more real output, like physical output, like
Hmm.
stuff loaded up on shipping containers for free every time you do this QE, ZERP, fiscal playbook. And I think the breaking point of that is, all right, we ran 2020. Like every time this dollar system gets in, offshore dollar system goes into like a contraction because it doesn't have a Fed like to naturally be the
Right.
lender of last resort. What it has to do is this offshore dollar system has to get Washington, D.C. and New York to bail it out, right?
Yes.
So you have to get those three things to bail out all of these fake dollar IOUs that are existing around the rest of the world. So getting out of that pickle that this system has placed us into, like it is the same thing as saying as solving the national debt crisis, as everybody points to. That's exactly
Yeah.
like the system framework puts us into the debt. Right. So getting out of this, you need a clever end around. And I think that's where we get into stablecoins and the
Yeah.
Bessing math.
So this now that we've got up to 2014, now let's bring a couple other angles in on this. You have and what happens in 2014, Ukraine. Okay. Um, Xi comes to power in 2013, and Xi's the one who says that's enough. So you have a sovereigntist in charge of the CCP. Now you have the Hu Jintao faction, which is largely City of London, no longer on board with this whole system. For years, how many years did we tell you guys? I'm old enough to remember the story that China was going to eat everybody's lunch, and we were going to, and the center of global power was going to move to China. That's because London and the old European were going to move their power center to China because they controlled the oligarchs who were the money, who were the political power within China. When Xi comes to power, everything changes in the same way that we had executed the rape against Russia after the fall of the USSR, and then you had Yeltsin to manage their decline, and then you move, and then we were, London was literally guys like Bill Browder and Edmund Safra and all that stuff that Martin Armstrong got caught up in. Russia was dead in the water. They were flat on their back. They were broke. They were $200 billion GDP. It was the ruble had blown up in 1999, and Putin was supposed to be just an extension of that. And they thought that Putin was on their side when Putin wasn't on their side. And he immediately, with first 18 months or so, he tried to work with them, realized that this was not going to work, and eventually said, "Nope, that's it." Puts the oligarchs on notice, nationalizes Yukos, puts Khodorkovsky in jail, and sets himself up as the big bad guy. The first expression of somebody saying, "Nope, that's it. We're for Russia." Xi's a similar figure, but you still have a problem because the United States is captured by these same globalist people at the political level, at the military level, at the institutional level, right? But the United States is pushing away from that after 9/11 and pushing away from that coming into 2008. And so you have to run the scenario where you have to fully destroy the US's ability to strike back. And that's what 2008 actually was. You take Fannie and Freddie off the market. You have the LIBOR, and the offshore dollar system is now the entire dollar system because the Fed at the zero bound is not a central bank anymore. It's just another Eurodollar creation mechanism. That's all it is. It's not a central bank. But so we start with 2008, we come out of that, and we wind up with what I called for years the central bank coordinated, the G7 coordinated central bank era, where we did round robin QE. So there's the US, then it was the Bank of England, then it was the Swiss National Bank, then it was the Bundesbank, then it was the Bank of Japan, then it was the ECB, lather, rinse, repeat. We just went around and around and around and around until 2022. But in 2014, it had to continue because Xi came in, as Matt pointed out, and said, "Nope, sorry, we're not doing this anymore." Refused to open up the capital account, kept the onshore and offshore yuan, different lending rates, different capital structures, whatnot, and said, "No, we're not doing that anymore." And the money that they moved into China to control China got put behind the wall, and the Chinese wouldn't let it out again, and put all of the offshore creditors under Xi to the back of the credit line, so that when anything collapsed in China, right, they went through their boom bust cycles, guys like Soros and company were not getting paid. So when you watched Evergrande, for example, is a perfect example of this. When Evergrande blew up, Xi was like, "Oh, well, the foreign creditors get to the back of the line." everybody else gets bailed out first. And that's when George Soros writes his editorial saying, Xi's the devil and shit like that. These were the tells to me as I was trying to learn this stuff and figure out what was happening in real time. But 2014 was the fork in the road, which is why we blew up. Which is why Ukraine got blown up by these same neocons, the same London faction within within the American power structure, and Putin's response was to move into Syria.
Mhm.
And then they started the great migration out of the Middle East because they had already decided on their Gantt chart to decamp somewhere else. They got thrown out of China. So then we've been in this kind of, well, where do we decamp to now? Singapore? Well, that's not going to work. The Chinese control Singapore, or they have made inroads into Singapore, even though there's a lot going on there. Hong Kong? Nope. So now eventually they settled on Dubai because they still had the Arab states and they still had all the geographic choke points. So they were still thinking like the maritime empire that they built, that they have to control the maritime choke points in order to keep liquefying this system. But the United States was beginning to move out of this. And that's why when Ron Paul comes on the scene in 2008 and starts the process of speaking for the remnant, and in 2012, they have to freeze him out of the Republican nomination, literally stealing the the 2012 primaries and handing it to Mitt Romney because they had to make sure that it was whoever they had in charge, whoever won that election, Obama or Romney, that the system would continue to operate. And Hillary Clinton was, of course, then going to be the next one, and it was that was the globalist play. That was their Gantt chart. And Trump is the guy who said nuts to that because, as to Matt's point earlier, going all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, the American people had said that's enough, and they didn't understand why they said that's enough. They just knew that's enough, and our institutions were still just strong enough. And this is where you can actually say the Constitution is actually still just barely strong enough to stop them from running this playbook on us. And they were able to extend it into 2024, but they were never. But we got 4 years of Trump, once they had to out themselves as a broad enough cross section of the American people that there was an operation being run against us for our own destruction. This was not in our best interest. Then Europe was in burn it to hell down mode in the United States, and the hope was that they could get us involved in some kind of large war with one of their proxies. They failed with Russia, failed with China, and so now in 2024 or 2026, they were building Iran as their failsafe point for this. So now I get to be Tommy and go pee and get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Matt, I hand it back to you.
All right. So Tom's superpower, one of them, if you listen to him long enough, you'll realize he's a game board. Like he plays actual games, so he thinks about these things. What are the other players at the game going to do? What are their incentives? All of that. So he comes at this like with that framework. I want to go back, like we talked about the fork in the road of 2024. So I think we've gotten the audience kind of a background. What was the legacy system? Onshore dollars versus offshore dollars being the key thing. It's all just IOUs. It's turtles all the way down. At the end of the day, it's U.S. Treasury debt backstopping, the entire apparatus. So before we get to 2024, just I want to lock it in, like in this existing kind of financial system, global dollar system, WTO, international trade system, whatever you want to call it. How does the U.S. Treasury get a dollar, right, to fund itself and go spend it on things like military or pay its Social Security claimants or pay Medicare claims, whatever? It has to issue a bond or issue a treasury bill with its primary dealer network. What are these? These are financial institutions who they'll print the dollars out of thin air. It's not necessarily the Fed printing. The dealers are the ones who first print the money. And then the dealers, they're called dealers because they inventory that big pile of debt and then their job is to market it and place it onto balance sheets in the private sector. Um, so to get a dollar in the existing kind of structure, it's you have to go into debt. That's the only way. Um, Now in this new structure, what Besant's been putting in since 2024, there's a different approach, and it's this. Remember what we talked about, the Civil War greenback. You got to come up with a clever end around to, punch your way out of the corner and get to that, you know, get out of the building and into open space, afterwards, like back into um, I don't know, safety, clear fields, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so I'd start with, basically day one of this administration. You can see Scott Bessent in his interviews as soon as like February 3rd. He's telling you the playbook. He says, we're going to monetize the asset side of the federal government's balance sheet for the benefit of the American people. It's kind of code language. It's hard to understand if you're not paying attention. I think most of us still don't understand it. Hopefully, will help people
Mhm.
grasp what that means. But I'll go through it in terms of his project management chart. All right, first, what is this stable coin dollar thing? Sounds, like everything when you see a new word, you're like, what is that? It's free real estate. But just think about it as a greenback, like on this whatever infrastructure rails that this Bitcoin arrival in 2008 showed us we could do. We had technological structures where the US could now bypass this global, cartel. At the end of the
Mhm.
day, like, Tom would call it City of London, but it's all of it. Like
Right, right, it
it's
is.
all these global money centers, not in the US, not within our regulatory, sovereign sphere, but they're piggybacking on the US economy and on our currency unit.
Agreed.
So to do the end around off of that, as opposed to going to your primary dealers for your marginal funding, saying like, oh, let's go place a 10-year bond or a 30-year bond or a 5-year bond or whatever. Eventually, like as the bang for the buck for every dollar of debt you go in the hole creates, maybe when we started in the 1950s and built out the Eisenhower interstate system, those types of public projects with borrowing, those would pay for themselves, right? Obviously, the interstate's going to, help the U.S. economy as a piece of
Right,
infrastructure.
right.
But like you just slowly keep going along, and you're like, all right, we added Social Security, or we added Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security was New Deal. We add, Part D onto Medicare.
Right.
It eventually like morphs into like this stupidity, like CARES Act, where you're literally spending you're going in the hole with government borrowing to keep businesses from laying off workers. You're like, this has reached the point of absurdity, right?
Yes.
You're getting no real output from that debt creation. All right. So to get out of that system, where it's not economical anymore to keep going in the hole. You got to figure something else out, and this is where that modern day analog of the greenback comes into play.
Mhm.
Um, you create a unit that's not in the hands of, say, a banking cartel. You tilt towards, I'll just call it like treasury supremacy, right? Where it's treasury is taking back some authority here to get the constitutional order back on a sound footing, which requires like just monetary stability, right?
Yep.
So what you're doing here in the Besant playbook, what you're working towards, instead of that CBDC route that the Bidenistas had us marching towards, we're going a different route where this dollar comes from private, it's still private sector issuance. Treasury is not the one, it's a little bit different than the greenback in terms of it's not just coming from, the U.S. Mint or some department of the Treasury. They produce the notes and they go into circulation, all that. It's coming from private issuers.
Mhm.
They have to be backed by Treasury bills, like IOUs maturing in 45 days or less. So that bid ask, we talked about that. What goes in the middle? It's that old debt. But what's happening is um, under this old global dollar, offshore euro dollar system. Um, your borrowers realize what's going on, and they're going to become less and less willing, more reluctant to underwrite risk or put capital in to this thing where the economics no longer work for longer and longer terms. So this is why if you follow treasury auctions, how it's funding itself, the maturity is moving lower and lower and lower. And I'd argue
Hmm.
what's actually happening, it's falling into this stablecoin unit package. In 10 or 20 years, we're just going to call these things dollars. Like same
Hmm.
way, those bills, those silver certificates versus a Fed note, dollars, whatever. All right. We're moving the maturity down on the IOU. It's falling into that stable coin. And then you're going to see these Genius Act stable coins start to one, like they're going to be incorporated into the domestic banking system. I'll get into the
Hmm.
executive orders here. But then you're also going to see them in international trade, right? As countries, sovereigns, everybody needs access to the resources. Just it's free for all and open market. If whoever can afford them and pay the price, you're the one who's going to get them.
Hmm.
Um, that is moving towards this, call it stablecoin, digital greenback, whatever. It's moving towards this new settlement rails where instead of like a credit-based money, now we have they call it tokenized. Just think of that as coinage, right? You're putting a wrapper around the metal, which
Hmm.
is the underlying value, the thing, and that's your unit of trade. That's what we're moving towards, like an asset version of a dollar with a clever end around.
Hmm.
Um, and it's no longer a liability definition of the dollar. So the way the euro dollar system worked, it's just someone's asset is someone else's liability. You
Right.
cannot get out of that I guess that embedded nature. Like it's
Right.
just wrapped up in there versus stablecoins. One of the key things that just came out in this clarity legislation, which is in make or break mode,
Hmm.
um, they separate out this asset-based definition of a dollar from the interest bearing or yield producing aspect of the dollar. What they mean there is the issuing authority itself who puts that stable coin into circulation cannot like anchor it into or forcibly anchor it into, actually they can't, they're prohibited from anchoring
Hmm.
into the yield seeking activity behind the lending out of dollars to other parties to generate yield. Well, this is huge. Like, what does it
Hmm.
actually mean? It is so as a owner or like, yeah, owner of your unit in the old world, in a liability definition, you can't really be an owner, right?
Right.
You're a creditor, right?
Right.
And this frame, and then your dependence on your IOU being paid back is dependent on the solvency of whoever the issuer was behind
Hmm.
that IOU. And this new framework, right? You cannot make that dollar, which is like an asset-based definition, you cannot forcibly put into, you can't even put your customers into that relationship where they're dependent on the perpetual like credit expansion activity, the lending
Hmm.
activity, which is ultimately forcing your saver to bear risk, is what it
Yes.
amounts to. So
Yes.
it's a huge, huge development. I think we're still just starting to wrap our heads around this. All right, but these stable coins, these asset-based definitions of a dollar, you'll tokenized or whatever, just modern word. Like just think about it. Your dollar is now a separable asset. You can actually pull it outside of this fractional reserve euro dollar system in a roundabout way while still technically being in the system, right? Because it's still, at the end of the day, it's getting its that sandwich of value is this 45 or day or less treasury bill, which is
Hmm.
just another IOU. So it's like a clever roundabout way to bend this system, for like ultimately preserving the constitutional order. So we can preserve in this clash of regional powers that's started.
Hmm.
So we can fund ourselves at the end of the day. So we have this capital pool we can tap into. And you can read it in the headlines. The Guard hates it. Like everybody is like stablecoin. Andrew Bailey from the Bank of England. Stablecoins are bad. Why? They
Yep.
don't say why,
Right.
but they know it's because we've got a tool. They could do the same thing, but at the end of the day, they can't because there's no demand for euro, ECB bills, European issued
Or
bill. Like nobody
or
wants
the
it.
or the British pound, right? The British pound is just I mean, honestly, the British pound is just a forex liquidity token. It's no different than It's all it is, right?
Yeah.
No, yeah, and this is a very subtle point that I already moved to immediately when I saw it. So there will be no zero time dependent savings, meaning passbook savings, meaning if you don't lock up your savings in some form of time vault, you get no interest off your savings. See, as a pure Austrian, I've always been like, yeah, zero time risk should come with zero interest, because interest is what you get for foregoing the access to your money. So you, if you, so when you look at what they were actually fighting over with Clarity, it was to the banks were actually arguing, look, we can't have this. All we'll be doing is doing the exact same system as before. Now,
Mhm.
the savers, if they want to pull yield off of their savings, they have to put it aside for a certain amount of time. And, and then you'll get paid some interest. And the interest will happen either, and this is in the crypto world, we call it staking. It's the same thing. You put your stuff away for a certain amount of time, you lock it, and you'll get paid more in the future, right? Well, in this case, we're doing that with dollars, but we're not doing it with, shitcoin number 27, right? And what that does is it gives the bank certainty that the capital is not going to leave immediately, so that there's not immediate digital bank runs, because the people have locked their savings up and they can't move it. So the banks get to lend out with some amount of knowledge that the money is going to, that the reserves, that their reserve that they lend out against is going to have, you know, insurance of it not leaving the bank, because it can't leave, right? So this is important because it's actually moving us back to a rational, less leveraged version of classic net interest margin banking. Banks want to get out of the casino of the $0 system. Why do we complain about the banks and the banksters? Because they're out there in this casino where, running all of these scams and all of this crap that goes on out there, and they're not actually lending into the productive economy, right? This is the been the biggest complaint about our banking system since 2008. When the reality is that the banks actually want to get back to funding infrastructure projects, and the government's telling them they're going to have to fund these big infrastructure projects that Trump wants to do to create his golden age. Well, then they're like, well, then they can't just immediately allow depositors to pull their money out whenever they feel like it. Everybody has to full risk. And so, in the classic sense of what a bank was supposed to do in net interest margin banking, it's classic 363 banking. You lend at 6, you pay out 3, and you're on the golf course by 3. That is classic banking. And the banks were supposed to be the ones doing the risk assessment as to how to manage that 363 infrastructure. The depositor gets paid a small amount of money. The lender, the lendee, the guy who wants the entrepreneur gets, money at a reasonable cost of capital to go build something that's going to produce a higher rate of return over what he borrowed at, and everybody wins. Like, that's the way that go back to fucking Mary Poppins, for Christ's sake. Mary Poppins turns on a bank run,
Mhm.
right? Because the bank's like, no, your money is in that guy's house over there. It's a Wonderful Life all over again. But because and again, It's a Wonderful Life, same thing. George Bailey was going out and lending into other people, lending money into other people's homes in order to build out the community. But the problem was the money could be pulled out of the bank immediately, and then the whole thing collapses. And so we have to get back to that level of thinking. And that's where we go. That's where we want to actually, to be honest with you, we would like to go back to a world where Matt's Twitter handle isn't reality, leverage
Mhm.
USTs, right? We want to get back to a lower leverage requirement, or a lower leverage. Like, we don't have a market driven leverage rate at this point. We have
Well,
a
it'll go there regardless. The trees don't
right,
grow
yeah,
to the sky, but it's the
right,
question of, do you
right.
preserve the American constitutional order, or this is
No.
where, the de-dollarizers, the hyperinflations.
Mhm.
My take on history is currencies collapse when you've lost your sovereignty, like
Right.
the Weimar Mark or whatever. It's like, well, you were conquered.
The Turkish lira is in
Yeah,
that process.
exactly. Or
They're literally being sucked dry by the Bank of England in order to keep the Bank of England from collapsing at this point.
Indian rupee. Like, go look at the
Indian
charts.
rupee, yes,
Yeah. All right.
exactly, same thing.
So back to Scott Bessent. We're going to
Mm,
monetize the asset side of the federal government's balance sheet for the benefit of the people. This is where you get into what are the assets because we focus on the debt and what the system
hmm
forces us to. We have like our armory is all of the stuff on balance sheet that we've
Yeah.
amassed over 250 years. So
hmm
the obviously start with the gold.
Right.
We have to have it.
Right.
The the land, Bureau of
Yep.
Land Management, all of that, the mineral rights, all of that, the
mm
permitting,
hmm
Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which is that gets into this
mm
this IPO issue, which
mm.
is huge for well,
Yes.
house affordability. What oh the equity stakes that the government has been taking in projects. So if you
Yes.
think about it, if why is the federal government buying like shares in Intel or an economic equity stake? Why is it buying like MP materials for producing rare earths, critical minerals, all of that? My read on that is the government is marking up the assets it needs to win this geopolitical struggle to get out of this period of history on the other come out of it on the other side
hmm
with holding the championship trophy.
hmm
And so this process, hey, we're going to change the definition of dollar, shift it down. Your offshore dollar, that's dead. I'll tell you the market signals how we know like
hmm
it's on its back or on it's on its back
hmm
and ready to be taken out. Um, the stable coins, I'm not a stablecoin maximalist by any means. Like, don't
Right.
if you hear me, if you read this, like at the end of the day, I want this. It should lead gold, Bitcoin. Like we have to get to the Repeg Act of 1875 to get to the
hmm
golden age, in my opinion. This is an
Sure.
intermediate solution to get us
hmm
out of the pickle we're in.
hmm
But you monetize those assets, you mark up all of those things that I just talked about. SPR, also the oil inventory, all that. Who
Right.
else? Who else has massive oil stockpiles? Oh, China, right?
Right.
So if you were going into this fully supplied and ready for the war, you actually want to see that markup. If you're holding those old offshore dollar IOUs, those are going to lose their purchasing power, right? So we'll
Yep.
call that someone else's dollar.
hmm
Tom notes it's LIBOR, it's set market price in London. That's transitioning, US, where it's like, okay, to actually access short-term, overnight dollars, you're going to have to show up to this facility, Federal Reserve Bank in New York, for what's called tri-party repo, which means you don't just have two banks, doing some quiet deal like, hey, I'll give you these treasuries and I'll give you dollars here, some lending arrangement. And then meanwhile they say that to nine other banks, right?
hmm
Uh, you have to meet in the
With the same
middle.
with the same collateral.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You have to meet at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York as the like custodian blessing this transaction in the middle. And that's how you're going to get access to short-term dollars now. That's SOFR. Um, for that, you need T-bills, right? And this
Yep.
is this is where money markets, all of this stuff. You basically got three choices, uh, three things they can invest in. It's treasury bills, short-term repo, which just means, hey, I'm going to put it's a secured lending for short-term dollar. So I'm going to give you
Right.
my treasury bill.
hmm
You're going to give me $1 back, and it's a repo secured finance loan. And then
hmm
third would be the Fed's RRP facility,
hmm
where you give them your dollars, they'll pay you an interest rate, and they'll back it actually with one of their treasury debt securities.
Right.
Those are three options. I'll get into that with what we just saw yesterday and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
4 week tree
This,
bills. We got to go into that and I'll tell you what's going on. But I want to set the stage. What's actually going on in Venezuela, Iran, Cuba, soon to be green, all that? What's going on is all of these supply demand relationships. Like, what does the term marketing actually mean? It's not some bullcrap undergrad degree you get at the University of Phoenix online, where it's just developing a clever you know marketing image, like and then tweet about it. Like that's not
Mhm.
marketing.
Right.
Marketing by definition, go back to like read the prize, Standard Oil. It's about finding a consumption center to buy your
Stuff.
product. Right. Yeah,
Mhm.
that is marketing. Um, and so what's going on in Venezuela, or you could say Iran as well, we are reconnecting all of those links between production and consumption. Who gets access to what resources? So oil,
Mhm.
gas, metals, etc. Um, and then on top of that is whose financial franchise is going to like see that action, settle it. What is it going to be paid in? The banking relationships, all of that. That is what's going on in this big picture. And I think when everybody just thinks, what are we doing in Iran? If you don't start from that foundation and everything we've talked about for a couple hours now, I don't think you can make sense of it. Like it won't
No.
make sense from heads or tails.
No.
Um, so yeah, that's what I see going into effect. Or like, how do you know? Well, it's like, all right, start with all the executive orders from the Trump administration. It starts on like day 3 in the office.
Mhm.
Like if inauguration day was a Monday or Tuesday, by day 3, the first executive order, or in that first batch, was the repeal to Biden's, which put us on that path to the CBDC. It just kills it in its tracks. It's like a management policy memo where you're telling all these agencies what to do. It's like, you're done. That's over. And then the
Right.
next one that comes, Besant's out talking about, trying to communicate his playbook, hard to understand. We're only slowly getting it. Next month, you get an executive order that says, "Hey, treasure are all of these government agencies who've been seizing Bitcoin for or for criminal enforcement actions. There's a couple 100,000 Bitcoins around there. You now, like management policy, you need to consolidate all of those. If it's just sitting in some, signing device in someone's file cabinet, some drawer, it's like, that's important. We need to consolidate those. And it's going to sit under a treasury, department, management, et
Mhm.
cetera. So it's like the executive, the CEO is sending out, it's like, guys, treasury supremacy. All of these little government fiefdoms, these intelligence cutouts, whatever, uh, we're tightening this up. All that Bitcoin you guys had, whatever the heck you're doing with it, we're going to be organized around. It's going to roll up into Treasury. Then you get the
Mhm.
Genius Act, which like this is like one of the most unproductive Congresses in history. Like I don't, when people say we have a Republican trifecta, Congress, Senate, White House, I don't view it that way. Tom would echo that. Like they don't cooperate at all with this executive branch or like the only thing that they're cooperating on, or one of the few things, is the Besant playbook. It's like they delivered Genius Act, and you could say one big beautiful bill, which was like
Right.
also a key piece here to enable
Mhm.
this. But those two executive orders kind of set the stage for where we're going. And then you've seen a couple last week. One was to direct the Fed to get ready to onboard this new dollar, these rails, onto the Fed's existing architecture so that they could access these settlement venues. Say, what is the Federal Reserve? At the end of the day, it's just a trusted meeting place where the banks can go and settle with each other with minimal counterparty risk is
Mhm.
really what it amounts to. And the reason you get that is that in itself like builds up to their dollars trading at par against each other. So onshore, when you see Wells Fargo Bank is $1, JP Morgan's dollar, and then your local,
Credit
tiny
union.
little bank branch
Right.
wherever is they'll still get if they're a Federal Reserve Bank member, their dollar is still worth par if they're trading at or if they're settling at their Federal Reserve regional bank branch. All right. So you got the dot like and then this all comes down to in my mind what we're working towards is whose dollar can maintain 100 cents on the dollar or par.
Mhm.
That's where we're headed. So the onshore banking system through the Fed, all these mechanisms, um, they have a robust mechanism to defend par of their system. And I don't
Yeah, they
think
do.
like in this capital war, who breaks first, they're I don't worry about their dollar breaking the buck. We've had some scares, all of that. We've got all of this architecture, FDIC, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
It's like, I think this isn't to Maginot Line. It's been hard and tested for, 100 years at this point. Like
Right.
we won't break on that front. And then you say these stable coins, what they're anchoring to is your short-term T-bill, right? Which is That's your most liquid dollar IOU in the system. Like the framework in
Mm.
the offshore dollar standard, every dollar is an IOU. The T-bill, especially the shorter term, that is your that is your most liquid, most like if any credit can hold, if any IOU can hold par, it's your 4 week T-bill. So that's what's
Right.
going in to the stable coin. So I think they have um, a mechanism to defend 100 cents on the dollar. And then last, these offshore dollars, your Fugazi, your IOU, what are they going to defend with? And this is where you're like, oh crap. And then everybody, you see what's going on here in Iran, the squeeze. They're the unknown because they don't have, ever since like if if you think about Jerome Powell as like a transitionary figure, he's
Hmm.
definitely not the same thing as Greenspan, Bernanke, Yellen, but
Agreed.
he's kind of in there. If you think about, he went to
Right.
Princeton in the same era, he went to Georgetown Law. These people are his peer group. So
Hmm.
he doesn't see things quite the same. This is just my opinion. I don't know him.
Sure.
He's not cut from the same paradigm, but he's also of that world. I would think of him in
Right.
history. He's a man of a prior era that's now gone with the wind. He's a middle
Hmm.
figure.
Hmm.
Kevin Warsh, this new Fed chair, he left the board. I want to say 2011, 2012, when he saw what was going on. He's like, I'm not going to be a part of this. And then as we've got this new faction in the United States taking control of political power, gradually, regaining kind of the sovereigntist authority, like sticking back up for the 13 colonies at the end of the day.
Hmm.
Um, he's not going to go along with that playbook. So what you're seeing right now build up is this dollar squeeze on the offshore dollar. That's what Venezuela
Absolutely.
is, or Strait of Hormuz is actually creating. And you're gonna say, how do you
Yes.
know that, Matt? Well, I don't know. You can read the charts, look at the technicals. Tom goes through them every week in the market reports, better than pretty much any other big bulge bracket banks strategist is going to give you. Usually, you won't get much insight there into what's actually going on, but with Tom, he'll give you signal, in my opinion.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Thank you.
but what's going on? So yesterday we had Memorial Day. US,
Yes.
the traders, you think about all of this whole dollar system. Um, Talked about the primary dealers who create the government debt. About a third of them are offshore. Let's say two-thirds of them are US financial institutions. All of the US guys were on holiday yesterday, doing, appreciating the military
Right. Right.
for what they've done, as they should be. Everybody else was off, and then the only desks that were on are going to be, think about it in terms of US market hours, it's going to be Canada, so Toronto and Montreal. Western Europe will still have some people in seat. I go with who's two, three? Yeah,
No, no, that's okay.
that's it.
Toronto, Montreal. Yeah. And
Yeah,
then, and then,
everybody
and
else,
then Europe.
Tokyo, Hong Kong, they're at like middle of the night. They might have a skeleton crew, some traders. Why do I say this? Because if you see some action, it's not going to be the night shift. It's going to be
Right.
whoever's on during the day. All right.
Right.
So yesterday, we actually did. So Tom mentioned SOFR. We've got SOFR futures, which trade
Mm.
on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. It's
Hmm.
mostly digital right now. I think their open outcry, like their floor pit, was actually open for limited hours yesterday, up until 1 p.m. Eastern. So the US, if there was going to be activity in this biggest of big global money markets, um, US, our skeleton crew is on until 1 p.m. Eastern. After that, it's like we're up, and then it's like the offshore can do what they want to do, right? And so on
You're
the
gonna love this
chart,
thing.
you're looking at the 4 week T-bill. I won't share screen, but if you look at it, I look at it in Bloomberg, it's just like constant drips down. The
Right.
4 week T-bill right now, all right, the Fed's policy rate, they're trying to hold short-term money markets at 3.5 to 3.75%. I said in money markets, there's basically three assets you can play with now. It's treasury bills, overnight repo lending, or Fed's RRP facility. You got to go out and seek yield, right? You can't just park in dollars, not earning any interest. All right. So we've been seeing pressure build up to this for like the last week or two of SOFR interest rates for secured borrowing on overnight money. They're hitting that 3.5% lower bound. We're
Hmm.
seeing money markets who are approved to access this RRP facility. They start putting in from zero. They're like 24 billion is coming in for overnight. This was like in the last 1 to 2 weeks. So what that's telling you is the supply of dollars is moving in to these instruments in
Hmm.
bigger quantity. Like supply of dollars is bigger than demand for dollars or new money creation in the global financial system, like at the end of the day. And that I'll take that to its endpoint here in a second. So we started seeing this pressure pushing down, right, the last few weeks. And in response, so this is what the Fed does, their Federal Open Market Committee, like trading desks. They are a player in this market and they're trying to keep these interest rates inside of that policy corridor. So what they can do is they'll be like, oh, we're not going to buy any T-bills this week. Oh, that'll bring
Right.
the yield up if we'll let more supply come to the secondary market. And that's kind of their response over the last week or two as SOFR started to go down towards that lower bound, as money market funds started showing up, putting cash into the RRP. It's like a ship coming into the harbor. Its money is it wants to find safety, right? Or
Hmm.
same thing as tucking money under the mattress. That same analogy. All right.
Right.
What happens yesterday? Only players who are open, the only trading desks in their seats after 1 p.m. Eastern. Eastern. It's going to be Canada, and then you could say the Western European banks and their kind of evening shift, which you'd still
Hmm.
put some of your traders there, your first teamers. You would want them in the seat just to interact East Coast United States market hours, just because it's the biggest liquidity venue. You got to be there. All right.
Hmm.
So yesterday, what we saw after 1 p.m., the 4-week Treasury bill, it just goes down like steadily, 3 basis points every 10 minutes. They took it down from 3.67% down to like 2.7%. So it's 80 bips below policy corridor, which is
This is
an
insane.
insane. Yeah.
Yes, it's absolutely insane. Like Tommy, you have to realize what Matt is laying out here is like financial Armageddon, for these
Uh,
guys. I
it's
mean,
not Armageddon. I'll go
no,
through
I
what it
mean,
actually means.
what I
Yeah.
mean is that it's saying these guys are so desperate to figure out a safe harbor that they're
Yes.
willing to bid up the 4-week Treasury up 80, down 80 basis points, or push the price up that far, and they're desperate for it, and that can only happen because there's no liquidity from the United States, right?
Going out.
Right, going out
Yeah.
exactly.
So
So,
my
so
read
yeah,
on what this means. So you got all these offshore dollars. It's a shrinking pool. We've been tightening the reins as
right,
we bring this into like this treasury supremacy world again, digital greenback, all of that. You've also got Iran. You've got everybody talking about, oh my God, the Treasury or the Hormuz situation. We're all going to be eating our dogs in 12 months because it's going to be that bad. I mean, I'm
right,
not saying this. This is what
right,
everybody like.
right.
This is consensus on geopolitical and finance circuits. It's like
Hmm.
this. We like, sorry guys, your dogs won't have any food, and you're gonna like it's basically there, like
Right, right,
famine, all that stuff.
right,
All right,
right.
what's actually going on? Oh, oil 250, all like just any
Hmm.
that's generally kind of the framework. All right. What's going on here? What this is saying, given that like this response had to come from Canada, Western Europe, et cetera. I mean, it could have been skeleton crew from Tokyo or Hong Kong,
No,
whatever.
it was
But
bad.
that is saying that their supply of dollars is like is in a massive excess of the demand for new money creation, is what that's
Hmm.
saying. So what it's telling you is this offshore Hormuz squeeze, what it's actually translating to is economic like slowdown in those offshore, like these offshore jurisdictions that we would talk about, right?
Right.
All right. What does that mean? Higher oil prices, 250, blah, 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 whatever. It doesn't actually mean like the supply constraint, like the squeeze, like the oil tankers are not coming out of Hormuz. What does that mean? Oh, prices are going to skyrocket. No, what it means is those economies are responding by the private sector is lowering their demand for money, which and the legacy credit-based framework, what does that mean?
Hmm.
It means growth down.
Right.
Um, it's not, I mean, you could say CPI inflationary, oil is going to be higher here, but actually what it means for their banking system is at best stagflationary, at worst double D, like
Depression. Yeah.
deflationary down, like growth
Right.
down, prices down. So that's what we're actually looking at here. And then you see at the juxtapose, you look at the U.S. system. All right, all of those dollars coming in and bidding 4-week Treasury bills down 80 bips in a day, which is ridiculous.
Hmm.
Um, it's actually showing up. Fed has this H8 data report where it takes a snapshot of the banking system. It'll tell you line by line what are the assets, what are the liabilities. You can see it in the last like 3 weekly reports, and they're 2 weeks behind. What's happening is the US banking system is getting supplied with dollars. It's coming back
Hmm.
in. And
Hmm.
so far, they're just letting that build up in cash or reserves on the asset side of the balance sheet. Like the dollars coming in are liabilities that shows up in deposits. Um, but it's not translating in the US into new credit creation. What does that mean? Like they're
Right.
not giving out new mortgages or anything
Right.
like that, like new commercial loans, et cetera. It's just sitting there. It's just new fuel inside the US banking system. But what it's doing is, all right, assuming like eventually this commodity resources, you know, effect out of Hormuz, once it reaches a point, like price will rise until you hit that last marginal buyer is like, guys, I can't make any economic profit out of these resources. It's like a horse auction where like there's a guy who
Yeah.
just I'm bidding for everything and then he runs out of money. And it's like, let's say the ponies are all clearing for like top dollar prices. It's like, all right, that guy's out of budget. Like he's had his last drink, take him out of there. And then the prices just go
Just
like
collapse.
that's what I mean, it looks like we're walking into
Hmm.
here.
Hmm.
So totally different dynamic, I think, than you're hearing from most geopolitical podcasters, all of that. But that's how I kind of think about it. And I manage bond funds. That's how I read what's going on. And if you don't understand what's going on, like the Washington, D.C. and New York's objective is to reassert Treasury authority over monetary creation. Like Fed is going to defer. And that's where you get this board conflict going on. Like the Fed has become another board proxy fight,
Hmm.
or like the way the left and right are those two extremes of polarization. I don't I don't think of those two things as accurately mapping onto the real like
Right.
political factions in the United States.
Right.
I think it's sovereigntist and legacy globalist, sympathize,
Right.
whatever.
Right.
Um, but you can see that same kind of tug of war going on inside the U.S. And it ultimately plays into you got to understand what Besant's trying to do here, and they've gone so far down this road. Like they've gotten way farther in terms of if it's a race to put your project on the ground and get real market traction. Besant's playbook is now multiple years down the road and this whole CBDC route and like the Europeans, when you look at it, like Christine Lagarde's digital euro, which is coming. I can go into what that means,
Mm.
but we probably don't have time. That
Yeah.
hasn't even gotten out of the gate yet. So like they're
Yeah.
they're losing the race, they're behind. Meanwhile, from Scott Bessent's playbook, this is just marching right along. And then the last week was a big week in terms of steps on this project roadmap, and like the last one I'll mention here, member of Congress, I think it was Begich from Alaska, um, produced or presented a bill, the American Reserve Modernization Act, which is going in. It's like, all right, thinking about this legacy framework, the golden vaults, let's modernize that. And it basically crystallizes this whole Bitcoin reserve future. So none of this is happening tomorrow. It's going to play out over multiple years, but just to give people some anchoring in terms of just flailing about is the Strait of Hormuz open or closed, like take a big picture standpoint, what's
It's
going on with
irrelevant.
the monetary transition. And that's just the way I see it.
Yeah, no, I mean, what's fascinating is just so you guys understand, and we'll wrap it up here in just a minute. Is like Matt posted his thing on his observations on yesterday's 4 week T-bill market this morning on our Slack, on our private Slack server, and we were chatting about it. And I read that, and I went, "Oh yeah, I'm not surprised." The TLDR for all of that, for the layman in the audience, and for Tommy, who's clearly glazing over here.
No, no, no.
Yeah,
Keep going. I
no,
was
no,
gonna say I think
no,
I have a summary.
yeah. The summary is that we have drained dollar liquidity into the United States in such a way that now think about that against the backdrop of what Trump did over the weekend with tying um, forcing the Arabs to say, you have to sign on to the Abraham Accords in order to get a peace deal with Iran. Oh, and by the way, Iran, you're welcome. Let's bring this in because the entire Middle East is the oil flow, the money that flows because of their control over the old legacy systems, control over how the oil transactions are settled, flow through London and a lot of their offshore systems. So they're losing all of that, and it's all moving to the United States. And the when you see massive moves during days when the United States markets are closed, that's just a classic leading indicator that there's real stress in their markets. Like you don't have to like get, for the average person, you don't have to get much more detailed than that. For the geeks, like for the money geeks, like Matt and I, like it's we just look at that, we just kind of laugh and we go, we know exactly what that means. But for the average person, realize that this is structural. And so when I come on a podcast and I'm chatting with other people and I'm saying, look, dudes, we're winning. And you're like, well, why? Well, do you want the 3 hour version or do you want the 30-second version? Right. And this is what's happening. And it's this whole infrastructure. And what Matt's been phenomenal about and helping me understand is you can watch he's looking at parts of the market that I'm not. While I'm watching the bigger picture, he's watching the actual credit flows and the actual money flows and seeing, yeah, no, it's all playing right out. And it's fascinating to see how these things play. So,
No, but I was gonna say no. I'm not glazing over, and I think Matt, you could probably
mm,
relate to this.
mm,
I mean, right? It's the quote: amateur study tactics, professional study logistics." But it makes me think of after six years and 2,060 episodes, or getting into med school, as you know. I actually would look at them as identical. That they couldn't be further apart
mm,
if you first glance at it. But what I would really look at it and say is, yeah, you can do whatever it is you want to do. You can get into medical school. You can start a podcast. I would imagine you could open up whatever, a CNC shop. But what I've boiled it down to is, you got to get 8 hours of sleep. For me, I have to exercise. You got to get some sunlight. You got to be reading about things you enjoy reading, not that you think you should be reading. And then you just put in the work, and it'll do this little thing as long as forever. Now, if I wanted to attack that, what would be the thing I do? Whether it's I'm attacking, I don't know, a rival law firm or a rival paint seller or a rival what
mm,
personal trainer or DJ, I don't care who they are. I would attack the same things. In any way I could, I would fuck up their sleep schedule and
mm,
I would fuck up the climate control of their home, be it heating or air conditioning. Those two things, you can rattle anybody. It doesn't matter what the
mm,
position is, you can rattle them. And that's what I would do. So everything you're talking about, I look at it as like, well, yeah, if you wanted to fuck something up, you do it after the money supply. The inverse
mm,
is if you wanted to defend that and grow that for the long-term change, med school podcast, is you start with things that to the uninitiated seem insane, but if, as Tom's saying, is no, you're setting up the structure. So like, why as a sophomore did I take out loans for my remaining 3 years? Because my freshman year, I job at a bar and it fucked up my sleep and it fucked up my grades. And I was like, if I take this loan, I have to pay this much money back, but I know I can get straight A's and I know I can get into med school and I know I can make so much money that I could pay off this debt and it be nothing. Yeah, but if to your fellow 20-year-olds when you're living in a frat house, they're like, why are you taking out loans? Why are you not going to the party? And it's because if you look at it and then walk it backwards, you find the structure and you go, don't worry
yeah,
about the books. Don't worry about what semester you're taking this. Do you have sleep? Do you have time to work on this? Are you focused on it? Do you have air conditioning? So that's
right.
how I look at it in terms of the broadest strokes.
Mm,
I'm like, no,
mm,
it does make sense. Yeah,
right.
this is what you would do. You would keep as much, I don't know, reserve battery packs as possible if you're playing poker on your phone. Above all else, you're like, I can play for 90 hours. I got a bottle of Adderall and I got a bunch of batteries. I can lose for the next 12 hours. I'm on meth. I'm going to go for the next week and my phone's
Right.
charged. That's how I look at it.
Right. Yeah, yeah. No, you're right on top of it,
I'm
Tommy. It
fucking
is.
paying attention.
I know you were paying
I know
attention,
you
dude.
are.
I wasn't making fun of you, dude. I was
I'll
just
come
like,
out there.
there,
No,
there
no,
comes
no. It's people say that
there comes the
sometimes. They're
point.
like, you don't look like there. I'm like, if I'm quiet, it's the best respect I can give you because I'm thinking.
You're a
Right.
good
I'm
Cool.
listener.
thinking
All
and
right. Good.
listening.
So,
Yeah.
no, I know that about you,
Yeah.
Tommy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I
it's
know. I
like
know.
I also know that when we started, we said we're going 90 minutes, and we were at 2.5 hours, and Matt
No,
was
dude,
getting
I
into
don't
the
give a shit.
and the really geeky shit, and I'm like, okay, well, what? How how long is this going to go? So when you put it all together, folks, like it's this is about a fundamental shift in the way we do business, right? In the way we do business at the political level, the interpersonal level, and everything. And just to like bring it back down to like the bare essentials, as Tommy just pointed out, money is one half of every transaction that you engage in your life. It's the most important commodity that's out there. And, you know, what you should be hoping for, and what we all hoped for when we got in, I know when I got into this, was are we going to have, are we going to have people that are good stewards of our money or bad stewards of our money? When we had bad stewards of our money, I was a critic of all of it.
Because there's
When
no
we started,
neutrality. They're
right,
good or bad.
they're either good or bad, right? And so you have to go, okay, because we live in a political world where there are guns and, and everything else. So, in the scenario that we just laid out, like this is where I had that level up moment where I said, well, the Fed can be used as a test technology. It can be used for good or it can be used for bad. It all depends on who's one running it, who's in charge of it, and what's their policy. Eventually, yes, should the Fed go away as a thing? Most likely, but you don't take your you if you want to win a football game, you don't take your defense off the field when the opposing offense is on the field. You don't put your third stringers in. You don't,
Yeah.
you have to play the game out, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And
I think
it's
good or bad is like that's not the it is the way to look at it.
Sure.
But I would frame it as like use this thing is do you use it for winning
I was gonna
or
say,
Right.
do you let your adversaries use it for conquering or
well, no,
winning is
And
both
that's
sovereignty.
a,
and both are
and
winning. It's who's
right.
winning.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
Well,
that's what it is.
from my perspective, who if I'm getting conquered, that's bad, and if
Yeah,
I'm
and it's
conquering, then I'm
I
winning.
would agree.
no,
It's like, yeah,
but that's and as Tom was
that's good.
saying, it's like so why are they doing it? It's like because you can, and that comes that back down to like that you just have to be extremely realistic and be like it's an
Mhm.
imperfect world.
Right.
Hey, and hey, as far as it goes, we're on this spot separated by oceans, soaked with resources, and we've got this military. I, what are the odds that they just happen to our team is trying to do something that is for the most part good? I'm like, you don't get that roll of the dice often. Like, shut
Right.
the fuck up and take it. And yes, so sometimes it appears as B-2 bombers. They're either leaving here as you cheer or they're coming here as you say fuck.
Well,
Well,
those are
and
your
the other,
last two institutions, the
yeah,
military and the
yeah,
executive. Once it,
right.
at the end of the day, like those are your last two fighters.
Right.
Yeah.
And and as I've been saying for quite a long time, we mostly commentate, especially in the financial press and especially in the political press. We fight amongst in a world defined by intelligence assets who are narrative shaping because it's all management perspective economics going all the way back to Jim Sinclair, who taught me that 20 years ago. When you guys were in college, I was, I remember reading, it's MOPE, and MOPE becomes MOP, which is management perspective politics, and which is what we dealt with through most of the Obama and Biden juntas. So, but at the end of the day, guns are real, narratives are not. Commodities are real, but debt is a thing. Debt isn't really a thing. You can just default on it. Like at the end of the day, I can enforce I like this is when you have to get back down to this is reality. There are trees behind me,
Yeah.
right? And oh, by the way, you can put a loan against those trees. That's nice, but at
You
the end
know,
of the
it's
day,
all
the trees are still fucking there. And if I've got a gun and the bank says I want those trees back, they're like, really? Is it really worth it to you? Because
well,
I'm going to defend it with a gun. Like,
I was gonna
that's
say
where it comes
it's
down to.
that what I think what Tom you're saying, it's what I've always kind of boiled it down to. I'm like, yeah, it's the gun-free zone sign.
Right,
Mm.
It's an
right,
agreement between people with guns.
right.
I can go another hour on what happens when you de-arm the civilization and
Yeah.
what the purpose
Well,
of that is. Yeah.
and one of the other ways of looking at this is when Matt invoked earlier whether or not the gold was at Fort Knox, right? Um, it does not matter. Like I remember having this conversation with Dexter White well before we ever started Goldwoods and Guns, right? Just to remind everybody that we have a 35 or something, some retardedly long relationship, he and I. And he just looked at me and said, dude, do you really think like just because we leased that gold out, and I'm not going to argue with you, like I'm not going to argue with you that we might have leased that gold out in order to suppress the dollar or do this or play these games, but possession is 9/10 of the law, and the gold is still under the Mariner Eccles
Yeah.
building. It's still there, and it's still protected by the U.S. military. So everybody can go fuck off when we
Yeah,
say, "Oh, by the way, it's
that's what I
ours,"
always
but
say.
you owe us money. Yeah, that's nice. Come and get it.
That's what I always say.
Well,
I'm
that's
like,
why it's West Point. That's the real vault, as I
Yeah,
understand
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And
Oh, that's
that's
true.
how I put it. It's like, oh,
Mm.
it's Treasury's assets and they custody it at West Point. It's in the military's hands. That
yeah,
tells you
and yeah.
exactly what's going
You know
on.
what I didn't
Mhm.
know is next to Fort
Mhm.
Knox or right outside it is also the largest U.S. like domestic station of tanks. That's your security. That
Right,
doesn't, they don't advertise that.
right.
That's a separate thing where there's like 100 Abrams tanks. Like
Uh,
now to me looks like bank security.
It's not
well,
Secret
again,
Service or yeah.
Yeah.
right, and the other thing to think about as well is that a lot of that gold that's supposedly in our reserves is mostly 90% gold, right? It's not, it's in the form of coin. It's not in the form of LBMA, good for deliverable bars. It's not in the form of COMEX deliverable bars. It's 90% gold, which we use for coinage because 90% gold actually holds up under physical use on a regular basis. It's mixed 10% with copper. And you can't deliver that to a futures market, but you can lease it out as an asset to do things with it. But
Yeah.
the gold never goes anywhere because nobody wants that 90% gold
Yeah.
relative
Um,
to the system that you're lending it into, you're releasing it into. This is the this is the strongest argument as to why the gold is still there. So
So to
just
tie it off, I think,
Mhm.
all right, if Scott Bessent isn't playing for the home team, it's getting harder and harder to get like we've had Treasury secretaries in the past, Hank Paulson, Rubin, et
Geithner,
cetera.
holy
Yeah,
shit.
they're just all right. They're playing for this
Hmm.
offshore dollar, you can tell.
Hmm.
But if you all right, everything Bessent's doing, it's like, all right, this guy's playing for the home team here, my opinion,
Right.
as I'm watching
Yes.
the facts come in. And
Hmm.
every time you update your prior, and you can map out
Hmm.
his project management roadmap, you're like,
Hmm.
oh no, he's actually running the playbook here. He's competent at this game in the same way like a Bismarck was.
Right.
Um, and then you look at other things he's trying to do. One of the key ones I see is a notable effort to ramp up the American, public, the voters, whatever, on money savviness, because most people are dumb with money. Like
Yeah.
just the average person is an idiot on what they do,
I'm not gonna
the
lie, I'm really bad with
financial
money, dude.
decisions they
Like,
make. And like I'll juxtapose this with think about after September 11th, what did George W. Bush go? What was his message to the American people? Go out and go
Go out.
shopping.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
that's how you
It
fight
was
terrorism.
I'll use the R word here. It's just sorry. Like
No, it's
It's just
fucking
retarded.
retarded. It was
yeah.
Yeah, it was retarded.
how do you fight terrorism? And it's like you go out and you get Gucci sandals.
Or worse, like what Auntie Annie's or something at the mall.
Right.
It's just stupidity.
Whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
All
It's
right,
dumb shit.
that's your old economic model. That's your old offshore euro
Mhm.
dollar. That's what it demands. Versus talked about everything Besson's building. Um, he's focused now, like one of the Treasury's efforts is to like lay out education to ramp people up on,
Mhm.
you could say financial literacy, but just not making dumb decisions. Not everybody
Right.
has to understand everything we're talking about. And oh, the
Right.
4-week T-bill rate came in 80 bips today, broke corridor, all that stuff.
Mm.
He's got this mymoney.gov initiative where Joe Schmo, if they're sorry, Joe Schmo's too derogatory, like just
Right.
guy, like
Right. Joe
American
Sixpack.
worker.
Joe
And he's
Sixpack.
awesome. He's awesome.
Yeah.
He is like
Yes, he is.
he is the building block of our society.
He
So I don't
is.
want to say Joe Schmo. That was wrong.
Mhm.
But he's got tools now, so he can go figure out like, all right, is this financial decision dumb, or how should I be making decisions with my money? So he's got this effort. He's like that kind of project that he's actually focusing on that is like, all right, what does the American household need to know to put themselves on sound financial footing? That's what ultimately over like 10, 20 years later, like instead of having a society where like most people, like a majority of people can't break a like $500 emergency expense or something crazy like that.
Right.
Um, get people to actually have savings, get them reserves. In this legacy system, um, it was the opposite of savings. Your savings get sucked out into
Hmm.
some government grift, boondoggle. Either it's a
Yep.
war or it's quality leering center, whatever. It's just going into the wood chipper.
Right. Right.
Versus now, Besson is he's putting us on a framework towards like we can actually have a savings, and then it ends with the end game here isn't stable coins. That's an intermediate step. The
Yeah.
end game is getting the actual reserve money in a financial system, in a banking system, to be a good that is inside of the private sector. So whatever it is we choose, is it gold? Is it Bitcoin? Is it, I don't know,
A
ribeye
mix thereof.
steaks? Whatever.
A mix thereof.
We'll
I
fight
like.
that. We'll fight
Mhm.
that one 20 years away, but we're actually going hopefully going to have an industry, a savings base. People can get into a house. That's where we're
Mhm.
going. It's going to take a long time to get there, like
Mhm.
years, decades. I hope to see it by the end of my life, but I think my kids will be able to live in that world, and that's the
Mhm.
golden age. It's not
Yeah.
right now, but
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
moving towards it.
And I want to remind everybody that my friend Susan Kokinda reminds everybody that we're not living in the golden age, but Donald Trump is already there. Like he already sees it. He lives in this. He like to him it already exists. He's just like the steward of getting us there. You know what I mean? Like
Pulling me forward in
he
time.
really does kind of inhabit that mindset already. And I think that you have to have that mindset in order to be able to, you visualize it, you inhabit it, and then you just make it happen.
That's
And this is a very important point. We have agency, folks.
that's the entire podcast is no, I live mentally in a space where it isn't, but where it is now in 2026, I was living in 2020, and like right now I'm in a I know I don't it's not like an idea. I'm like this is where it's going to be in 2032. And right now
Exactly.
I'm just pulling this thing through time, but we got to
That's
wrap
right.
it. And
Yes.
I'd love to do it again. Matt, websites and social media and shit, put that in the email. I'll copy and paste it and put it in here. And I'll give you my number. And gentlemen, thank you both for your time.
That
Thank
was
you.
Tom
phenomenal.
Longo,
I had a lot
Matt,
of, I had a great time, guys. Take care.
thank you for coming to Matt's TED Talk. It was brilliant. All right, guys, till next time.